Hey there, friends and neighbors. This is an update on the progress of Oregon House Bill 2005. It's made its way back to the House floor for final reading, discussion, and vote. A quick rundown of what House Bill 2005B covers. There are three main points to this bill. The first point is to ban the sale, manufacture, transfer, or possession of so-called ghost guns. The term ghost guns, as used by this bill, would mean any guns, frames, or receivers that don't have a serial number. This covers homemade guns, personally made firearms, unfinished frames and receivers, and any stolen guns with serial number scratched off. The second point of the bill is to limit the types of weapons that 18 to 20-year-olds can buy or possess. There are a lot of convoluted rules around what kind of guns that they're permitted to have, but basically, if the weapon is a semi-automatic or holds more than about 7 rounds in the magazine of the tube, 18 to 20-year-olds are not allowed to have them. The third and the final part of the bill seeks to remove preemption. This means that local governments, such as counties and cities, have the option to designate public buildings and the area around them as gun-free zones. The whole idea behind all this is that they want to limit where concealed carry holders are able to carry here in Oregon. Now, if you want to skip some of the procedural stuff at the beginning and jump straight into the discussion of the bill, if you jump to about the 15-minute mark, that should be a pretty good area for you. If you're just interested in some highlights, some of the ones that I particularly like were points made by Representative Ed Diehl and Representative Bobby Levy. So once again, thanks for being interested in what's going on here in Oregon regarding the Second Amendment. And without further ado, here is the Oregon House discussion and vote on House Bill 205. Just a little heads up, they did pass it, so it will be going to the Senate.
The flag salute will be led by Representative Lisa Reynolds.
I pledge allegiance.
The opening ceremony will be a moment of silence. Courtesies. The honorary pages today are, and if the pages would stand when I call your name out, Noel Masters from Wilsonville High School, the guest of Representative Courtney Neron, Aditi Gunashaker and Kate Scipio from Kate Scipio Del Campo, Lake Oswego Junior High School. And they are the representatives of Daniel Wynn and Cedra Nuri from the International School of Beaverton, and the guest of Representative Ken Helm. Further courtesies, Representative Scharf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I would like to extend courtesies to my fellow law-abiding legal gun owners who have joined us in the gallery today to watch us debate House Bill 2005B. These are our constituents. They are the people we see every day in the grocery store, the people who drive our school buses, the people we sit next to in church. They are our neighbors, our mothers, our sisters, our brothers. They are black, brown, white, gay, and straight. They are just like all of us here on the floor. So please join me in extending them courtesies and welcoming them to their state capital.
Further courtesies, Representative Mannix.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to extend courtesies to the precinct committee people who are with us here today to learn more about the legislative process. Joining me on the side aisle directly from my district are Precinct Committee persons Michael Staffy, Advis Redaway, Catherine Stone, and Jessica Davidson, along with other PCPs from surrounding areas in Marion County, Yamhill County, Tillamook County, and Deschutes County. Please join me in welcoming all of them to our state capitol.
Further courtesies, Representative Sosa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to extend courtesies to one of our pages this morning, Cedra Nuri, who is an 8th grader at International School of Beaverton. She is actually the sister of our office intern in District 30, and she hopes to go on to the medical field and become a dermatologist. So, welcome.
Further courtesies, Representative Elmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I would like to extend courtesies to my constituent, Alicia Overstreet, for her involvement in the legislative process and continued advocacy for equitable laws. Alicia is an outstanding mother and advocate with a forensic psychology degree who recently spoke out about House Bill 2005. Through her expertise as well as her own lived experience, she has observed how legislation like this will disproportionately impact Black and disability communities in Oregon. Historically, laws like this have effectively acted as targeted discrimination against Black folks. Alicia's hope is that Oregon will choose to change this narrative by instead promoting solutions for marginalized populations, such as mentorship programs and supporting avenues for safe recreational opportunities for youth in inner city and rural areas. I urge you all to make sure that you listen to the pleas of your constituents as we move forward today. Individuals like Alicia should be applauded for their representation of the true spirit of democracy. Alicia, thank you for your bravery and advocacy. It is an honor to represent people like you.
Further courtesies, Representative Reynolds.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, please welcome to the Capitol today my friends, sisters, and fellow advocates for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. This is the organization, and these are the people who help make me who I am. I'm going to name folks who are both in the gallery and in the overflow room. Hillary, Amy, Diane, Terry, Debbie, Marcia, Emily, Marcy, Alicia, Mary Pat, Erica, Pat, Kyle, Stephanie, Leslie, Judy, Tony, Amy, Madeline, Morgan, Maria, Cicely, Saskia, Nan, Doreen, Elise, Bethany, and Julie. Hope I didn't miss any, but thank you all for your activism and for wearing red. Thank you.
Further courtesies, Representative Javity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to extend courtesies to Max Sherman, who's a retired school teacher, as well as a former candidate for House District 32 as a state representative. He's visiting with us today. He's somebody I know personally, and I'm grateful that he's here to watch us engage in this democratic process. So thank you for attending today, Mr. Sherman.
Further courtesies, Representative Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'd like to extend courtesies again to our folks, our constituents, our fellow gun owners and gun rights advocates in the upper deck here. And today we are going to be asking to not read the bill out of courtesy for the folks who drove so far to get here today. So thank you to them for being here.
Further courtesies? Just like to welcome all the guests that are here today and appreciate the courtesies. With that, verification of a quorum. The clerk will open the voting system to determine the presence of a quorum. Excuse, Ruiz, Heeb. A quorum is present. Messages from the governor. Messages from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker, I'm directed by the President to inform you the Senate has passed House Bills 2285, 2447, 3058. Mr. Speaker, I am directed by the President to inform you that he has signed Senate Bills 31, 207, 216, 224, 864.
First reading memorials and resolutions.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 15, appointing Legislative Equity Officer.
Measure read first time is passed to the Speaker's desk for referral. Committee reports. Special orders of business. The clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 2005. A bill for an act. Be it enacted by the people of the state of Oregon. Section 1. OS 166.210 is amended to...
Excuse me. Didn't see the cue in. Representative Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Evidently, I missed the cue here. Mr. Speaker, I move in compliance with Article 4, Section 19 of the Oregon Constitution and notwithstanding any provisions of the rules of the House of Representatives of the 82nd Legislative Assembly, the requirement that on its final passage each bill shall be read section by section be suspended for House Bill 2005 and that it be read by title only.
Representative Osborne moves that in compliance with Article 4, Section 19 of the Oregon Constitution, and notwithstanding any provision of the rules of the House of Representatives of the 82nd Legislative Assembly, the requirement that on its final passage each bill shall be read section by section be suspended for House Bill 2005 and that it be read by title only. Those of the opinion that House Bill 2005 be read section by section should be suspended and the bill be read by title only will say aye. Those opposed, the motion is adopted. Now the clerk will read the bill.
House Bill 2005, relating to firearms and declaring an emergency.
The question now arises upon third reading and final passage of House Bill 2005. Representative Reynolds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues.
Excuse me, Representative Reschke is in the privilege queue.
Pardon me.
For what purpose are you in the privilege queue, Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to declare a point of order.
Please state your point of order.
My point of order is I have reviewed House Bill 2005B and concluded it violates ORS 171.134 and House Rule 14.15. House Bill 2005B fails to score at least 60 on the flesh readability test.
Representative Reschke, under consultation with Legislative Counsel, it is my ruling that House Bill 2005B does comply with House Rule 14.15 and ORS 171.134. House Rule 14.15 states that no measure shall be accepted on the desk for introduction unless it is accompanied by an impartial summary of the measure's content describing the new law and changes in existing law proposed by the measure.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to appeal the ruling of the chair to the body.
Representative Reschke appeals the ruling of the chair, and he is joined by Representative Boshart Davis. The question is, shall the decision of the chair stand as judgment of the House? Those of the opinion the ruling of the chair should be sustained will vote yes. Those opposed no. To clarify, a yes vote is to sustain the chair, and a no vote is to overrule the chair's decision. The clerk will open the voting system. Representative Diehl votes no. The ruling of the chair is sustained. We are now back under the original bill. Representative Reynolds, please.
I guess I'll start from the beginning. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I rise today in support of House Bill 2005, the Gun Violence Prevention Bill, a practical measure that will reduce gun violence in Oregon and make our communities safer. I firmly believe that every one of us was called to this work by a desire to make life better for all Oregonians. And toward that end, we all want to protect our communities and safeguard the most vulnerable around us, especially our children. As a mom and a pediatrician, you can imagine that this is front and center for me. Colleagues, there are some tragic realities we must not look away from. Every single day in America, 120 people are killed by guns, and more than 200 are shot and wounded. The impact of these shootings to the victims, their families, their communities, and to first responders costs our nation and our state dearly. Perhaps as chilling is the reality that in the U.S., gun violence is now the #1 cause of death for children between the ages of 1 and 18. Almost 5,000 children and youth lost their lives to gun violence in 2021 in America. This is a reality I refuse to accept. Colleagues, every turgle Oregonian has the right to safety in their homes, in their schools, at the grocery store, and in houses of worship. Turns out more guns do not make us safer. As some of you know, I got my start in the balconies and hallways of this building as an advocate for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense. I fought alongside fellow volunteers from across the entire state for policies that reduce gun violence. And this dovetailed perfectly with my work as a pediatrician. And now, as a legislator, every decision I make in this building is guided by my North Star of making Oregon the best, the most equitable, and the safest state in which to grow up. Reducing gun violence is core to that mission. And last year, I was proud to bring my knowledge as a pediatrician and advocate with Moms Demand as I joined my fellow colleagues to find an Oregon solution to the epidemic of gun violence happening in our state. Over the past year, I worked with Representative Paul Evans, a military veteran and gun owner, Representative Jason Kropf, a gun owner and prosecutor who grew up hunting right here in Oregon, and Representative Dacia Grayber, also a gun owner, firefighter, paramedic, fellow Moms Demand Action advocate, who sees firsthand what gun violence can do in her role as a first responder. This particular group of legislators had many discussions, and we didn't always see eye to eye. But for us, we saw this as our strength, and for nearly a year, we brought our unique perspective to the table as we engaged extensively with gun owners and enthusiasts, retailers, the Oregon Department of Justice, local governments, advocates, and survivors of gun violence to craft the common sense measure that we present today. The result of this collaboration is the Gun Violence Prevention Bill, House Bill 2005, and we have this before you for consideration. This offers an Oregon solution to an urgent nationwide problem, and it will make our communities safer while respecting the rights of responsible gun owners and giving high regard to Oregon's heritage and culture of hunting and recreation. The Gun Violence Prevention Bill will do 3 things. First, as outlined in sections 1 through 5, 14, and 16 through 19, House Bill 2005 will prohibit the possession, sale, and transfer of undetectable or unserialized so-called ghost guns, which are increasing in popularity and which thwart the necessary background check system which is already in place for gun purchases and gun transfers. Ghost guns are the weapons of choice for violent criminals, gun traffickers, dangerous extremists, and people legally prohibited from buying firearms. These guns are being recovered from crime scenes in record numbers. There was a bust of a ghost gun workshop just last week in the home of a prohibited purchaser in Portland, and a year ago, a similar ring of ghost guns was discovered right here in Salem. Second, per sections 6, 7, 13, and 15, House Bill 2005 will raise the age of purchase and possession of firearms to 21 years old, while allowing exemptions for those firearms traditionally used in hunting and recreation. Remember, the federal government stipulates that one must be 21 years old to purchase a handgun, but only 18 years old to purchase a rifle, including semi-automatic assault rifles. The provision to raise the age to 21 for non-hunting firearms is important because 18 to 20-year-olds commit gun homicides at triple the rate of adults who are 21 and older. Finally, in sections 8 through 12, the gun violence prevention bill will give local control to cities, counties, and special districts to allow their locally elected governing boards and councils to prohibit all firearms in their public buildings and adjacent grounds if they so choose. And furthermore, the final section, Section 20, declares an emergency, and this 2023 Act takes effect upon passage. The three actions in this bill all work to reduce gun violence, help law enforcement do their jobs, and make our communities safer. And as you will hear my colleague, Representative Evans, say, this bill is the balance between personal liberties and public safety. And you will hear from my colleagues on the first two provisions of this bill, what my shorthand is ghost guns and raising the age of purchase and possession. I want to focus my remaining time on the third part of this measure, which is allowing local control over guns in public buildings. A little bit of background. Under existing state law, firearms are already prohibited in all public buildings, unless the carrier has a concealed handgun license, also known as a CHL. In 2021, this legislature passed Senate Bill 554, which grants local school, college, and university boards the ability, should they choose, to prohibit all firearms on their campuses, including those carried by those with concealed handgun licenses. Around 30 local school boards have chosen to protect their communities by prohibiting all firearms on their campuses. This affects 200,000 Oregon students and includes school districts from Tillamook to Klamath Falls to Umatilla, as well as many other communities from across the state. Clearly, local leaders, both rural and urban, have shown that restricting guns in schools is something they and their communities value, without forcing the same on communities who don't choose to do that for their schools. However, we do not allow other jurisdictions to have the same option. The status quo right now is that the state dictates what is allowed in public buildings across Oregon. My clinic, a private business, bars all guns from its premises. Shouldn't we allow local governments to do the same? Shouldn't we allow local jurisdictions to put in place measures to protect school board members, city hall staff, and election workers? Let me repeat, firearms are already prohibited in public buildings and have been for decades. This bill would simply give locally elected governing bodies the option to strengthen that policy to include CHL holders. This acknowledges and honors the unique differences in Oregon communities. Local decisions to restrict firearms would only affect public buildings and their adjacent grounds, and nowhere else. Local governments would define which grounds adjacent to their buildings this restriction would apply to and would be required to post signage clearly indicating where these policies apply. The terminology adjacent grounds already exists in statute, and House Bill 2005 does not create any new definitions. Can I ask a quick question? Can folks yield their time for me on the carry?
They can.
Okay, that was my understanding. I was getting a different message from. Anyway, the terminology adjacent, I apologize. The terminology adjacent grounds already exists in statute, and House Bill 2005 does not create any new definitions. We don't define every word in statute. We rely on the plain meaning of those words. Adjacent, we know, means next to or adjoining. Colleagues, we stood on this floor 5 weeks ago to take a moment of silence to honor and mourn the 3 9-year-olds and 3 staff members who died in a mass shooting at the Covenant School in Nashville. No one here failed to take that action. We are here to do the same today, to honor the lives of Oregonians who have been impacted by gun violence, to stand with our colleagues and put the health and safety of children, adults, and those who might knock on the wrong door by mistake first and foremost. I imagine that you all, like I, believe and the fundamental right to live in freedom from fear, as well as the right to live and travel safely in our community. The Gun Violence Prevention Bill honors these rights. It will protect the lives of our constituents, make our communities safer, and help law enforcement officers come home at the end of the day, all while elevating local control, honoring family traditions, and respecting responsible gun owners. I urge an aye vote on House Bill 2005. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And for the record, Representative Dexter yielded her time. Representative Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'll just put it back down. I don't know what's going on. Colleagues, my role today is to provide an overview of House Bill 2005B and clarify the anticipated costs associated with passage, and to hopefully help explain the opportunity costs involved of not passing House Bill 2005. I want to begin with a few comments. First is how I became involved with the drafting of this measure. Second is why I believe this measure actually represents an earnest balance of incremental improvement in community safety and individual liberties, and third, what our objective has been and likely shall remain. You see, last year I was asked by the Speaker, Mr. Speaker, to participate in a work group, not a work group I volunteered for. I suspect he wanted somebody, you wanted somebody, who owned firearms, had a history with firearms, grew up in a hunting family, and a person who could provide a unique perspective. As a veteran with more than 20 years in uniform and a lot of time spent in Iraq, Afghanistan, Central America, and South America, defending our rights to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness matters to me, and I do believe in responsible gun ownership. I have many guns. Our work group started with a thoughtful review of the facts, and the facts are ugly, of the seemingly perpetual cycle of deadly gun violence in our America, in our Oregon, with special emphasis on youth suicide as well as mass shootings. Since 2018, 6 of the 9 of the most horrendous mass casualty incidents, 6 of 9, have been planned and executed by young people aged 18 to 20. Now, yesterday I heard a lot about our shared concern for young people. Some here even suggested that younger people than 20 sometimes aren't able to make good decisions. I think the statistics bear that out. In nearly all of these instances, the availability of weapons made for war to young people was a demonstrable factor in the scale and scope of the tragedies. In Uvalde, the shooter was 18. In Parkland, the shooter was 19. At the Safeway in Bend, the shooter was 20. At Tops Grocery in Buffalo, the shooter was 18. Honorable colleagues, we have a problem. Many young people are not receiving the care, the help, or perhaps the love they need, and innocents are paying the price for their angst and anger. Ending gun violence will require a multifaceted approach. The underlying truth is that solving this problem will actually demand people with weapons choosing not to use them for lethal purposes. It is a very, very big job and probably not going to be resolved in the next few years. There is no one-step solution for changing our culture, and that's a hard truth to accept. We cannot do everything. But that does not mean we cannot do anything or some things. Together, we can make incremental progress. We can, and I believe this bill will, take rational, reasonable, and responsible steps forward as a community. We can outlaw undetectable, unserialized firearms, weapons that can help criminals skirt the laws we have set in place. We can limit access and availability to people who may not know how to deal with the power gun ownership commands. We have established a community standard for certain levels of civic responsibility where our actions impact others, and that's set at age 21. The U.S. government, after all, set the age for purchase of a handgun at 21 because of the lethality of easily concealable handguns. They've already done that. It only makes sense that we ensure the deadliest weapons are in the hands of people who understand the responsibility. In Oregon, we have set the age for other expressions of liberty, drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, and the use of marijuana at 21. This is the specific part of the bill that I worked on, and I originally asked to have that section named after my grandfather, Russell P. Evans, who, if you've ever had met him, would know he's not one to do something suddenly, and he's not one to try to take away people's rights or liberty. He was an NRA member, a longtime hunter, and a responsible gun owner. The kind of responsible gun owner that would teach you with the perhaps most direct method possible of what to do and what not to do with a weapon. And looking at the mass shootings that have become sadly normal, our new normal, I know Russell Evans would have demanded action precisely because he was a gun owner. You see, I was taught that responsibility means doing what is best, what is necessary. It is recognizing that all rights come with responsibilities, that all of us must find a balance for living together in relative peace and security, and it means sometimes doing those things you don't like to do because they're necessary to help others. That's what responsibility means. I believe this bill respects the heritage of gun ownership and hunting. While it raises the age to 21 for possession or purchase of most firearms, it specifically lists firearms 18-year-olds may possess or purchase absent parents, with exemptions for the young folks who have the gumption to serve in the military and for folks in law enforcement. It builds upon the federal law regarding handguns, and overall it reflects a common sense approach to a problem we all wish, and I think I can speak for everybody, we all wish we did not have to try and solve. House Bill 2005B also establishes what I believe is a permanent safeguard for local governments. Boiled down, it secures local government decision-making for public buildings and adjacent spaces. Instead of one statewide prohibition that could very easily come, it says local governments, and only local governments, get that choice. This means that local governments, not the state capital, will establish restrictions if and only if they choose to do so. Our objective is simple: do something that can reduce the number of killings and do something that may prevent suicides. House Bill 2005B invests an additional $356,816 in general fund for expanding the capabilities and capacities of the Oregon Department of State Police's firearms instant check system, because LFO anticipates 2 additional positions will be needed to meet the expected workload increases. Colleagues, you may love this bill, you may hate this bill, you may find yourself in the middle, but it is an earnest attempt to make an incremental but measurable progress. It is a balanced bill that respects the rights of responsible gun owners while improving community safety. And I recognize, probably more than some would suspect, the passions and good faith of all here today. There are no easy pathways forward, but there are responsible pathways, and I believe this is one. I urge passage today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Mr. Speaker, it should come to no surprise that I am in opposition to House Bill 2005. In fact, I'm in opposition to any bill which infringes on constitutional protected rights. I'd like to address a few items of particular concern in this bill. First, the bill limits and places restrictions on the exercise of constitutional rights of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. Second, it places restrictions on the sale and manufacture of unserialized firearms and restricts the means and ways in which people may acquire firearms. Third, this bill allows for strict, overbroad regulation of firearms based on location. As to the first, the Second Amendment provides that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I acknowledge the Second Amendment might not be absolute, but by bearing the possession of firearms for 18, 19, and 20-year-olds is not reasonable, nor is it constitutional. Simply, I recognize that the Second Amendment protects a right inherent to Oregonians and Americans. But this is not just my viewpoint. The U.S. Supreme Court thinks so too. While the Second Amendment plain text covers an individual's conduct, the Constitution preemptively protects the conduct and trumps any regulation. The burden is then on the government to justify its regulations by demonstrating that it is consistent with the national historic tradition of firearm regulation. Just like, for example, the First Amendment, the government bears the burden of providing the constitutionality of the action. The Second Amendment is no different. The Supreme Court is also clear in its instructions to the courts that in determining whether the regulation is constitutional, the court does not make its own judgment on the cost and benefits. Instead, the court must rely on historical guidance. What other courts have already assessed this regulation for us? For example, in Minnesota, a U.S. District Court judge concluded that permitting structures to 18 through 20-year-olds was unconstitutional because such restrictions are inconsistent in our traditional firearm laws. 18 to 20-year-olds are adults. We trust them to vote. We trust them to defend our country. To say that we need restrictions on gun ownership is simply inconsistent with how we treat them elsewhere in our laws. Additionally, the founders of our country placed age requirements elsewhere in the Constitution, showing they considered and knew how to set age requirements and chose not to in the Second Amendment. Lastly, the inclusion of the people in the Second Amendment and elsewhere in the Bill of Rights clearly supports that the Second Amendment extends to 18-year-olds. And because it does, the conduct inherent in the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, is constitutionally protected. It is a right just like any other. This law will go to court. Courts are bound by the framework set forth by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is clear. The Constitution is clear. This law will be struck down. Second point, the bill will also restrict the sale and manufacture of unregistered firearms. The promotion of this provision calls these products ghost guns, but in reality, there's nothing spooky about them. What this provision really amounts to is a punishment of lawful gun owners in the name of punishing the bad. But this is also constitutionally suspect. These regulations criminalize possession and will cite the untraceable firearms are sometimes used by criminals. But this ignores the firearms unquestionably protected by the Second Amendment are also sometimes used by criminals. Existing laws are sufficient in this area. Moreover, the restrictions imposed by this legislation are wholly unwarranted. State and federal laws already impose rigorous restrictions on the manufacture, transfer, and possession of all types of firearms. Potentially dangerous people convicted of felony offenses subject to a restraining order or adjudicated mentally defective are already prohibited from possessing firearms. Given the nature of criminals and the scope of existing firearm restrictions, it is highly unlikely that House Bill 2005 will do anything to keep weapons out of the hands of those who shouldn't have them. Lack of public awareness program. To make matters worse, House Bill 2005 does not provide a public awareness program to inform owners of unmarked firearms on new restrictions. Therefore, the legislation threatens to make thousands of otherwise law-abiding Oregonians into criminals overnight. What is most important is whether the now prohibited untraceable firearms are not typically possessed by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes. The state will never be able to establish this in court, just as the state could not do so in Delaware. So what is going to happen? Well, the state will get sued, the state will lose, and taxpayers will foot the bill. Third, the bill for strict and overbroad regulation of firearms based on location. House Bill 2005 will allow municipalities to create gun-free zones in any public building or adjacent grounds. This appears to me to be a threat to the right of law-abiding gun owners and their defense of self. In other words, this bill does not address the actual issue, criminals committing crimes. But this bill punishes lawful gun right owners while giving criminals a blank check in any public building. Mr. Speaker, firearm ownership is constitutionally protected right. The Supreme Court has been consistent protecting these rights just like all other rights in the Constitution. Colleagues, over 98% of shootings occur in gun-free zones. Let me say that again. Over 98% of mass shootings occur in gun-free zones, and we are going to create more. House Bill 2005 will allow local municipalities to prohibit CHL holders from public buildings and their adjacent grounds. If you park in the street outside your home and you carry with your CHL handgun to your vehicle, you would be in violation of the law even if you live near or adjacent to the public grounds. Simply put, this bill will have unintended consequences. Criminals seek areas where they understand they will not be challenged by others. This is a logical fault. But not allowing Oregonians who should be able to protect themselves and their loved ones, in my mind, is unfathomable. But the vast majority of gun owners are safe, responsible, cognizant of the inherent dangers in a firearm. Instead of punishing the good, let's focus on the bad. Because by punishing the good, what this bill does is the state will overstep. What the state oversteps, they violate the Constitution. This law will go to the courts. The court is bound to review the standard of protections given by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is clear. The Second Amendment protects the rights of the people to own a firearm. The state will show in court why this law is valid. Until then, it is not. We are inviting a lawsuit the state will lose, a lawsuit which me and my colleagues will support. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, colleagues, this bill will do nothing to reduce gun violence or mass shootings, which we all find horrific. It will not keep guns out of criminals' hands. It will once again violate our Second Amendment, our ability to protect our loved ones and members of our communities. Colleagues, when are we going to wake up and understand by passing one more gun law, we are not going to make criminals law-abiding citizens? We all deserve the right to live without fear, we heard previously. My communities will live in fear if you take their right away to protect themselves and their loved ones. Concealed handgun license owners are the safest in the country. Colleagues, we keep passing more gun laws and expecting gun violence to decline. Gun violence is not declining. When are we going to try something different? I urge a no vote on House Bill 2005.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Helfrich.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Today, I rise in opposition of House Bill 2005. I'm not here to talk about guns, if guns are good or bad. I'm also not here to talk about mental health or crime. I'm here to talk about money and the courts. It's no secret that if we pass this bill today, it's going to be challenged in the courts. Every single one of our offices has received emails telling us that this bill will be challenged. In 2022, voters of this state passed Measure 114. There was an immediate lawsuit, and implementation of the measure has been on pause as the courts deliberate. On February 17th, the Department of Justice told me that they had they billed out $223,409 to date dealing with Measure 114's litigation, nearly $250,000. That's 2.5 months ago. What does that number look like now? I posed that question in the Public Safety Ways and Means Committee subcommittee during the two amendments that were brought to amend the bill. I still have yet to hear an answer what that plan is to pay for those. Our state is facing lower revenues and tightened budgets. Why are we moving forward with a bill that will cost our state precious resources to defend in the court? Colleagues, I urge our state cannot afford House Bill 2005. I urge a no vote.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Grayber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill?
To the bill.
Colleagues, this is not the first time you've heard me say this, nor it will be the last. But my lens on every policy before us is the same lens I have used for over 2 decades as a firefighter and paramedic. It is life safety. It is to save lives, and I have dedicated my life to serving my community one call at a time, and now here on this floor. It's also the core of what motivates much of the policies I work on, and specifically gun violence prevention policy. But it's not just being a firefighter that motivates me, it's also being a mom. In 2010, I went from single mom of 1 to mom of 4 after meeting my incredible partner. One of my favorite memories of those early days of blended family time was walking the kids back and forth to elementary school just up the hill from our house. Then in 2012, Sandy Hook happened. Like many other parents that day, I nearly ran, choking back tears and with urgency, to pick my babies by birth and of my heart up and grasp them tightly to me. I relished that moment that would forever be denied to 20 families. Of all the bloodshed I had seen up to that point in my career, and with this new and unfathomable horror front and center to every American, I thought surely this would be the moment we would all come together. This would be the moment we would end gun violence in our schools and beyond. But as we saw in Uvalde, Parkland, over 380 school shootings since Columbine, and now Nashville a little over a month ago, it did not. But as many of you know, I've never taken no for an answer. I got involved in advocacy and then politics. I ran for office. I stand here before you today as an example of Oregon's refusal to be complacent. We've passed laws that have reduced gun violence and saved lives, and today we take yet another step to protect our kids, our schools, and our communities. Colleagues, we have to do what works. Not what anecdotally is bandied about on social media, but what empirical and vetted data shows us works. I've heard a lot of talk in this body about school safety, self-defense, gun ownership, and hardening our schools, and this is what some of the data shows. States with higher rates of gun ownership have higher rates of gun death. People successfully defend themselves with guns less than 1% of the time when there is direct contact between a gun owner and a perpetrator. People in possession of a firearm are more than 4 times likely to be shot. According to the U.S. Department of Education, since the 1999 Columbine shooting, 95% of U.S. schools have controlled access to buildings, up from 75% in the year 2000. While school cameras were used in 20% of schools in 2000, that's up to 80% currently. In fact, the school security industry has grown into a $3 billion market. And a little over a month ago in Tennessee, a state with expanded firearm access, the doors were locked, the teachers were armed, the police arrived in minutes, and yet in under 60 seconds, 6 precious lives were murdered. Mass shooting after mass shooting, what we have is a systemic failure to take action on policies empirically proven to reduce gun violence. We owe action to our children, to our teachers, to every family that kisses their loved ones goodbye in the morning. We owe action to law enforcement who are increasingly risking their own lives and safety. It does not have to be like this. Taking on gun crimes and violence this session is a top priority in service of what I would consider to be a universal truth, that we all deserve to feel safe. And I recognize that we have different ways to that truth, but I think that's universal. We all want to feel safe. I'm proud of this package because it makes sure we're getting guns out of the wrong hands while respecting and preserving responsible gun ownership. It builds off past legislation, like the red flag law that could have prevented what happened in Nashville, to make our communities and our schools safer. One specific part of this policy package I worked on is addressing ghost guns. As a reminder, ghost guns are homemade firearms with parts that can be purchased without a background check or a serial number, and they have emerged as a weapon of choice for violent criminals, gun traffickers, dangerous extremists, and generally people legally prohibited from buying firearms. Ghost guns can be undetectable when they're made with plastic and are untraceable by law enforcement when they are used to commit crimes. The use of ghost guns in U.S. crimes has risen more than 1,000% since 2017.
Please continue.
The Department of Justice said in a federal report this past February. We also are seeing ghost guns in mass shootings now, from Saugus High School to Sacramento Church. And recently, there have been several more incidents of school shootings with ghost guns in Maryland, New Mexico, and Kansas. Just last week, a quote, elaborate ghost gun ring, unquote, was discovered during a graffiti sting in Portland. Said Portland Police Bureau Officer Nathan Kirby-Glakowski, it is very important to get them off the street because our city is experiencing a significant amount of gun crime. And these just add to the flow of illicit guns on the street that wind up in the hands of criminals. House Bill 2005 gives law enforcement the tools they need to keep our communities safe and keeps guns out of the wrong hands by banning the sale, manufacturing, or importing of ghost guns. People convicted of possession of an undetectable firearm would face a misdemeanor on the first offense, which carries up to 364 days in jail, a $6,250 fine, or both. Second offenses and beyond would carry up to 10 years in prison, a $250,000 fine, or both. There's no shortage of rhetoric and misinformation swirling around the policies you will hear today, but I want to make one thing crystal clear. This package respects responsible gun ownership. We worked hard to address the concerns of gun owners, retailers, and hobbyists, and have developed an amendment, which you'll hear more about, to ensure ample time to ensure firearms are serialized and thus legal. We're not looking to make responsible gun owners illegal. As a responsible gun owner myself, I understand that we must respect people's right to bear arms, as well as people's right to live happy and fulfilling lives. This Oregon solution does just that, and I urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Diehl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to House Bill 2005B. To sum up this bill in one word, unconstitutional. This omnibus gun bill is being sold as a crime reduction bill. Sadly, it will do nothing of the sort. Rather, it's a full frontal assault on the Second Amendment rights of honest, law-abiding Oregonians. Benjamin Franklin once said, "Those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." And I couldn't agree more. In classic Oregon fashion of late, we deny the rights of honest, law-abiding citizens without actually tackling the real problems. This bill feels good and does nothing. This bill is being sold as a gun crime reduction bill. However, 70% of guns used in crimes are obtained illegally. What good do more anti-gun laws do if the bad guys are already breaking the law to get them? They don't care if making your own gun is legal, if possessing one underage is illegal, or if carrying one in certain areas is illegal. They are already breaking the law. Everyone here wants to reduce crime, especially in the crime-ridden Portland metro area. In my opinion, this bill is a misguided attempt to fix a Portland metro area problem. But the rest of the state does not have this problem, and the rest of the state does not want it. The carrier referenced the horrific Nashville school shooting. Everyone here is distressed by this and never wants to see something like that happen again. But the simple truth is that House Bill 2005B would have done nothing to prevent that tragedy. Having school resource officers most likely would have, but an Oregon bill that would have assured school resource officers in Oregon schools has not been given a hearing. What is this leadership doing this session to reduce crime in Oregon? Nothing. I have not seen a single bill see the light of day this session that will do anything to reduce crime in this state. It's one of the most pressing issues in my district, yet nothing moving through this legislature will do a damn thing. There have been bills introduced that would make a difference, but the majority is not allowing them to be heard, much less voted on. The representative from Frontier, Oregon provided a great overview of the many issues with this bill. I agree with everything he said, and I'll just highlight a few key elements of the bill. Regarding the ban on unserialized guns, bad guys will still build, use, and sell unserialized guns. The only people affected by this ban are law-abiding citizens who will be fined and be turned into criminals for possessing something they've already had for years and have a constitutional right to have. On the issue of age, 18 is old enough to serve and die for your country, to enter into contracts, to vote. The constitutional right to keep and bear arms should not be infringed. Similar laws in other states have been struck down. For example, in California. I'd like to quote what Judge Ryan Nelson of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said in his opinion when, on a law that infringed on Second Amendment rights for those from 18 to 20. America would not exist without the heroism of the young adults who fought and died in our Revolutionary Army. Today, we reaffirm that our Constitution still protects the right that enabled their sacrifice, the right of young adults to keep and bear arms. Judge Kenneth Lee concurred, writing, "We cannot allow good intentions to trump an enumerated and fundamental right deeply rooted in the history and tradition of this country," end quote. Regarding regional bans on concealed carry, concealed handgun permit holders have long been known to be extremely law-abiding. There's no question that you're safer around a permit holder. We're the most law-abiding group you're going to find. Concealed handgun holders are not the ones committing the gun crimes. Compared to permit holders, general public is over 200 times more likely to be convicted of a crime. In 2021, there were over 300,000 concealed firearm license holders in Oregon. How many gun deaths by concealed carry holders can you name? My wife and I are both concealed carry permit holders, as is my mother-in-law. Isn't it more likely that I would use a concealed carry permit in a public building to protect you? I know that's why my wife and my mother-in-law carry. Every year we are told that if we pass one more firearms law, then we will prevent gun deaths. But it hasn't happened. In order to reduce gun deaths, we need to be addressing other issues, mental health issues, and provide more funds for public safety. My final note on this bill. In the United States, gun restrictions have been historically used by the majority to silence and oppress the minority. With House Bill 2005B, Oregon is following suit, using the power of the majority to oppress the constitutional rights of the minority. This bill is unconstitutional. I urge a no vote or see us in court. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question of the carrier.
Question of the carrier. Does the carrier yield?
Yes.
She does.
Thank you. So in this bill, the penalties, I'm referring to the ghost gun sections, the penalty seems to give broad prosecution discretion. Is this intended to be a normal individual gun owner should be penalized as a misdemeanor, and the mass producers are subject to the felony penalty? Because I'm not sure in reading the bill which is which. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, Rep. Lewis, for getting that question to me ahead of time. House Bill 2005 sets minimum penalties depending on the type of offense, just like other criminal statutes. And prosecutors always have discretion regarding what charges they want to bring, and this bill doesn't change that. Prosecutors are tasked with consideration of all the circumstances of the potential offense and the involved person to make decisions in the pursuit of justice. So, yes, I would say mass producers potentially face more serious felony charges. This is an intentional policy decision indicating that mass production is a more serious offense than just possession. So, for example, for undetectable firearms, meaning undetectable by a metal detector, it's a Class A misdemeanor to possess, while a Class B felony to manufacture, import, sell, or transfer.
Thank you. To the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, we've talked frequently in this building about transparency. And in fact, we claim to be open and transparent about everything we do. And yet here we are again for 2 days in a row, trying to move a bill using a process that is anything but transparent. Once again, we are considering a bill that, if passed in the House, will go directly to the Senate floor, circumventing the public hearing process in the Senate and cutting off the right of the people to be heard in a public hearing there. House Bill 2005B has already been amended without acknowledging the right of the people to know what changes have been made in the bill, because the amendments came after the public hearing in the House. Sadly, what I believe to be the most egregious of bills will not be properly vetted, properly heard, and properly understood by those who stand to lose constitutional rights as a result of this action. By adding a small, inconsequential fiscal to the bill, it was allowed to move directly to Ways and Means and then on to the Senate floor after this debate here. If a long law enforcement career has taught me anything, it is this: law-abiding citizens are likely to obey the law. Those who commit violent criminal acts could care less about this bill. House Bill 2005B will not impact them. They will continue to have access to firearms of their choosing. And Mr. Speaker, I believe nothing, absolutely nothing in this bill will change that. What this bill will do, though, is put young adults in a position where they have to make a choice. Do they put protection of self and family above the law? Do they put constitutional rights under the 2nd and 14th Amendments above this law? Or do they follow this law, forfeit protection and constitutional rights, and become a criminal offender in doing so? I find it ironic, Mr. Speaker, that in less than 24 hours, this body has gone from a bill that allows children to make life-changing decisions for themselves to a bill that takes away constitutional rights of young adults due to their age. I urge a no vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. For the discussion, Representative Morgan.
Mr. Speaker, I'm strongly opposed to House Bill 2005.
To the bill?
That too. In my view, this bill is equal parts unconstitutional and a direct affront to the law-abiding gun owners in Oregon and my district. My colleagues have addressed the constitutional questions and issues with the bill, and I see no need to duplicate their efforts other than to say that our Constitution is clear in expressing the right of the citizens of Oregon and the United States to keep and bear arms. The fact that this bill seeks to place restrictions on that right is inconsistent with how I view government responsibility and the trust I have in the citizens of my district. But, Mr. Speaker, I was elected by the citizens of my district to represent their interests and to be their voice in this legislature. I would be doing my constituents a disservice if I did not also address that the regulations that are in this bill will only punish lawful gun owners. Rather than overregulate a constitutional right, the state should focus on punishing criminals. Gun control does not deter crime. Strict gun laws do not deter crime. If someone wants to commit a crime with a firearm, do we honestly think that a law in the books is going to stop them? The answer is no. As a parole officer, I have been in many homes and been on many situations where a felon who was already restricted, a criminal who already had no gun rights, was in possession of a gun. Gun control laws will not prevent criminals from obtaining guns or breaking laws. So this bill will do little to nothing to curb gun violence or gun crimes. But it will punish gun owners, enthusiasts, and hobbyists from simply exercising their constitutional rights. Gun control laws infringe upon the right to self-defense and deny people of a sense of safety. While I understand that the Second Amendment is not absolute, what I cannot understand are overburdensome regulations simply for the sake of regulating a product that some do not like. I served as a city councilor, and I served as a county commissioner. For many years in many areas, I have fought to support local control. But to me, this is not an issue of local control. No local official should be able to take away my constitutional rights. They are specifically enumerated. They are protected. I was elected to represent the citizens of my district. They sent me to this building to protect their constitutional rights. And I am confident that they would want me to vote no on any bill that curbs their constitutional protections. This bill is in direct conflict with our Constitution. The Bill of Rights does not change simply because the number of the amendment in the Constitution. The fact remains, Mr. Speaker, that the Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. Samuel Adams, 1788. This bill is inconsistent with that premise. I am passionately and wholeheartedly no on this measure.
Thank you, Representative. For the discussion, Representative Sanchez.
Mr. Speaker, to the bill.
To the bill.
Some of you may know already, of course, I am a gun owner. I grew up with guns in my home. Shot my first gun when I was about 5 years old. I was pretty good back then. But I also know as a social worker and a community advocate that we need to invest more in mental health and behavioral health. And while we've made gains, some gains, and I hope to make more this session, we're going to need to continue to rebuild this system, and that also means we have to figure out how we're going to pay for it. I also know that there are people out there who should not have access to guns. We all know that. Those people exist. They shouldn't have access to guns. And that's what this bill is about. I urge your aye vote.
Thank you, Representative. For the discussion, Representative Bobby Levy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, one of my bills that was unceremoniously killed this session, House Bill 2637, would have required K through 12 schools to teach local history and politics. I firmly believe we cannot start incorporating state history into curriculum soon enough, evidenced by the staggering constitutional illiteracy coursing through House Bill Omnibus 2005. Unlike the U.S. Constitution, Oregon's Constitution begins with the Bill of Rights, which is far more expansive than the list of liberties explicitly protected at the federal level. Scholars debated for decades whether the Second Amendment defended personal gun rights or allowed citizens to maintain armaments for a militia that was ultimately replaced and institutionalized in the National Guard. The decision in D.C. versus Heller validated that the original intent of the founders was to ensure personal self-defense by allowing gun ownership. The Oregon Bill of Rights, however, is far more direct about the purpose of gun ownership. Article 1, Section 27 says, verbatim, "The people shall have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state." There's no ambiguity in that provision. Oregon's founders lived in a state far more threatened by war and violence than today. But Oregonians are still plagued by violent crime, and we owe our citizens at least the right to a fighting chance against a rapist or a mugger, as elected officials at all levels can call to defund the police. We know that the current version of House Bill 2005, originally intended to target possession of certain firearms, has incorporated House Bill 2006, which discriminates against Oregonians based on age, House Bill 2007, which pretends to empower local governments to blatantly violate Oregon's Bill of Rights. Last month, bipartisan attempts to unblock school safety bills were blocked in this chamber. House Republicans responded to gun violence by promoting common sense solutions that were not in conflict with the Second Amendment or Article 1, Section 27. House Bill 2005 is on the floor today, not with the intent of protecting populations vulnerable to violence, but padding political resumes. The initial provision of House Bill 2005...
Representative, I'm going to stop you there. The intent, you impugned the body when you said that the intent was to pad political resumes. Please speak to the contents of the bill, not to the intent of other members on the floor. That crossed a line. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The initial provision of House Bill 2005, intended to ban the possession of ghost guns, is justified in the preliminary staff measures summary by the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms report of a 30% illegal firearm recovery rate in California, not Oregon. There's no known epidemic of violence in Oregon driven by ghost guns. An individual's right to bear arms is dependent on the Constitution, not tertiary law regarding serial numbers, just as our right to speak freely is not tied to a free speech license. Another grievous infringement on Article 1, Section 27 is the arbitrary denial of the right to bear arms for adults under the age of 21. Members of the public less aware of the legislative process may favorably link this bill to the age of recent school shooting perpetrators and identify a yes vote as a courageous attempt to protect our children. I too do not agree with people shooting our children in schools, and I prefer that we have better security in our school systems. The real legislative fixes to protect Oregon schools were brought up for a vote on March 29th, and they did not move forward. Upon passage, this bill will disenfranchise Oregonians between the ages of 18 and 20 without constitutional justification. Exercising their express rights under Article 1, Section 27 will be punished with a year in jail and a $6,250 fine. We can imagine how popular it would be arbitrarily declare that free speech is no longer allowed for people between the ages of 65 and 67, or freedom of association for people between ages of 42 and 44. Many Oregonians are already struggling economically with catastrophic costs for health care, rent, and general living expenses. This bill is a warning to young Oregonians. Exercise your inalienable rights and face the specter of job-killing stint in jail, along with a fine that you will not be able to pay off in a labor environment unfriendly to criminal convictions. This would greatly affect my own college-age grandchildren who have been hunting since they were allowed to legally for deer, elk, pheasant, and many more. They all own guns for hunting purposes and have been trained to practice gun safety because they have been taught to be responsible young adults. The final part of House Bill 2005 takes advantage of conflicts in Oregon's legal system between the legislature and local governments. The principle of home rule is firmly established in the Oregon Constitution, just as firmly as the right to keep and bear arms. The hard work of many county commissioners and city councilors frequently validates the liberty to pass ordinances that make sense for their communities. But the Constitution enshrines rights that neither this body nor any other local elected authority in the state may nullify. We should defer to local governments as often as possible, so long as they obey the state's constitution. However, this bill purports to grant local government ability to prevent Oregonians from exercising their rights to defend themselves and their state of their proximity to a building they may not even know is publicly owned. Just as we cannot legislate a city's ability to overrule the Constitution's ban on quartering soldiers and conferring titles of nobility, we have no power whatsoever to allow City Council to prevent someone from possessing a concealed firearm in our or in adjacent to civic buildings. This bill seeks to punish law-abiding citizens for exercising their constitutional rights, a dangerous precedent for the many Oregonians whose lives and livelihood only protected by the Constitution. An individual whose sheriff has verified that they should possess a concealed carry license, but finds themselves adjacent to the administrative offices of that county with a ban in place, faces 364 days of imprisonment and that fine I spoke of earlier. I ask you all to name another constitutional right as so deserving of imprisonment and impoverishment. Should a city allow a man's child to be imprisoned because their father committed theft? Should a property owner be fined because they refuse to quarter soldiers? Should a county imprison someone for incurring debt? The answer to all those is no, just as the answer to the question of allowing local governments to violate Section 27 is a no. This legislation is a clarion call to intensify dialogue with local government we represent and seek their input on actual local controls that they believe will allow them to better serve their citizens. I guarantee you that this process will not result in any local governments identifying provisions of the Constitution that they would like to see ignored or nullified in the name of ideology. Oregon's system for amending the Constitution is sufficient enough to address public safety concerns without suggesting that local government can lobby the legislature for permission to nullify our Constitution. Local governments are very well aware that nullification invites costly litigation, far more damaging than any desired benefit to public health and safety. The legislature is not empowered to simply ignore parts of the Constitution. We do not ignore laws we do not like. Every session, we submit bills to refer constitutional amendments to the people. Nothing prevented us from doing this with this bill. Infringements on Article 1, Section 27 strips women, people of color, and all Oregonians from all walks of life of the rights to defend themselves. I urge us to adhere to our Constitution and vote no on this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Boyce.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. To the bill.
To the bill.
I look around, 60 people here, the privilege, the honor of representing 4.4 million people. I submit that Oregonians, maybe more so than any state in the country, as far as diverse and contrast, economically, geographically, philosophically, politically, spiritually, the people that I represent, they understand the Bill of Rights, and this is not something they're willing to give up. I stand in the strongest possible protest in opposition to 2005. It's another very, very decisive bill. Of the 100+ days that we're going to serve in this body, yesterday and today are the two biggest days. I don't think I'll get a lot of argument on that. I want to read something, a paragraph. It's called Masking Totalitarianism by Walter Williams. I almost wanted to say William Wallace, a Braveheart. But here's the quote. One of the oldest notions in the history of mankind is that some people are to give orders and others are to obey. The powerful elite believe that they have wisdom superior to the masses and that they've been ordained to forcibly impose that wisdom on the rest of us. Their agenda calls for an attack on the free market and what that implies. Side note, nothing since history began has beat the free market for quality of life. Their agenda calls for the attack on the free market and what it implies: voluntary exchange. Tyrants do not trust that people acting voluntarily will do what the tyrant thinks they should do. Therefore, free markets are replaced with economic planning and regulation that is nothing less than the forcible superseding of other people's plans by the powerful elite. Since time began, man has tried to dominate man, 5,000 years. 2005 will not make our neighborhoods, our communities, and our state safer. In fact, will. 2 years ago, the passage of 554 proves crime is going up. It will, in fact, make our neighborhoods, our communities, and our state less safe. Nashville was referenced twice today. The 11th commandment is love your neighbor. I love that person, that transgender that was mentally ill, that shot those 6 people. Why didn't we know it? Why didn't we help? We're going down the wrong path with this bill. 2005 will make responsible gun owners criminals simply because of the type of gun they own and their desire to legally follow the Constitution for self-defense, protect their families, themselves, their neighbors, and protect the peace. I think I can speak for everybody on our side. We are united against violence of any kind, and I hope before the end of this session we can have some kind of resolution that we all stand firmly against violence of any kind in the state of Oregon. My grandfather, in 1941, he was the longest serving Curry County Commissioner of all times, 18 years, 1930 to 1948. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, he, the other 2 commissioners, and the sheriff took their deer rifles. Rogue River Bridge is almost 2,000 feet long, longest bridge on the Oregon coast, the Rogue River Bay. Each one of them took 12-hour shifts for 5 days to protect their community, their citizens, their families, keeping their oath of office in case the Japanese sent a submarine in to the Rogue River Bay. I encourage everyone to take a look at House Bill 2572, expands the definition of civil disorder for purpose of crime and paramilitary activity. In this day and age, my grandfather would have been part of that civil disobedience. Thank you for the extended time, Mr. Speaker. I want to read the shot heard around the world. 248 years since the shot heard around the world marked the beginning of the battles of Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775. These were the first military engagements of the war for the American independence. It was gun control that started the war for independence. Again, the people I run with, they are the most law-abiding, the least violent people you ever meet, but they're not going to give up their freedom to protect their families. What fatally focused the Patriots into a shooting war with the British on April 19, 1775 was not taxes or warrantless searches of homes or occupation by soldiers, although that was part of their resistance, their fight for liberty, but gun control, one of many attempts by the British to disarm Americans. The logic of gun grabbing never changes. Amongst other things which have occurred on the present occasion is likely to prevent the fatal consequences of having recourse to the sword, that of disarming the inhabitants of the Massachusetts Bay, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Lord Dartmouth to General Gage stated in response, December 1774, made it clear he was on the board with total gun confiscation, but he warned Dartmouth that going so would require a massive show of force. This was publicized with the colonies and was a number of events in motion that led to that April day. Your Lordship's idea of disarming certain provinces could and would doubtless be consistent with prudence and safety, but it is neither is nor has been practical without having recourse to force and being masters of that country. So yeah, we might be a long ways away from that, but we might not be. A lot of people, again, have deep concerns. All you got to do is look at the Soviet Union, 20 million people killed when their citizens were disarmed. Mao Zedong, millions murdered. So people, again, that I represent, rural Oregon, don't understand why they should have to look over their shoulder. There's so much information on this, so much history. Exceptional teacher. So you could talk about World War I, World War II, and how we got there. I'll conclude with this, Mr. Speaker. Let's do real solutions instead. I recommend we steer our effort to confront the drivers and root causes of violent crime in our communities. In our view, my view, these are addiction, plural, mental health, lack of law enforcement, community engagement, not enforcing current laws, mental illness, suicide prevention. Take this effort and get some solid encouragement and support for district attorneys. They need help to fight rising crime. One more story. All of us here, I believe I'm speaking for most everyone in this room, Martin Luther King was our hero. He was a conservative Christian. In the height of his ministry, he went to the Alabama State Police. His constitutional rights to ask for a gun permit. They told him no. None of his people were declined to have a weapon. You know what happened to him afterwards? Scattered his entire program. The heartbreak of America. Should have never happened. He would have lived another 20 or 30 years, Mr. Speaker. Maybe I'll be back later. Thank you for the time, sir.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Anderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill?
To the bill.
I rise today in support of House Bill 2005, specifically the part that discusses local control. This bill offers a practical solution to rising gun crimes. It helps law enforcement do their jobs and prioritizes public safety while respecting responsible gun owners. As someone who has served on Salem City Council for 8 years until I was elected to the legislature, I have firsthand experience of concerns surrounding gun safety. During this 8-year time I was on the council, there were many public demonstrations, including those after George Floyd was killed and also when Black Lives Rally matters. And one of those rallies spilled over into Bush's Pasture Park, which was in my ward and is still in my district. And this park is, the buildings in the park are owned by the city, so therefore they are adjacent grounds. There was at least one full weekend when gentlemen in full regalia carrying semi-automatic assault weapons and other guns were strutting around the park, disturbing the peaceful use of that park. I'm not so sure they were actually there to protect their own safety. From what? From other people who were with them, who were carrying the same guns? I had many people in my district and in my ward come to me and said they could not use the park that day because they were intimidated by all these folks open carrying in grounds adjacent to city-owned buildings. I had mothers and fathers to say they were there with their children at the playgrounds in the park, and when they saw this happening, they picked up and left because they were concerned about their safety. So I speak today in support of giving local control to cities, counties, and special districts to allow their locally elected governing boards and councils to make their own rules about the carriage of firearms in their public buildings and adjacent grounds, such as Bush's Pasture Park, if they so choose. This is voluntary for the local governments. Colleagues, this is about community safety. As a city councilor, I tried hard to pass gun violence protection and preventive legislation in Salem, but state law preempted these attempts. This bill will allow local control. At a time when day after day we witness mass shootings after mass shootings and we witness our children dying, the presence of firearms in public spaces can and is detrimental to the mental health and well-being of our society. And I can point to this example of what happened in a local city park where families should be able to recreate and enjoy themselves without being intimidated and fearful because of open carry. We all deserve to live free from fear, and giving local control to jurisdictions is a uniquely Oregon solution. I urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Wright.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill?
To the bill.
I appreciate the concept of local control that my colleague just talked about. Let me give you a little example. I was a principal of an elementary school, and I was down the hallway visiting a classroom when, on my walkie-talkie, my secretary said, Mr. Wright, we have a problem. Parents coming in who has a writ that basically says they can't come in and be with their children. He is heading down the hallway right now. We were a gun-free zone, but that doesn't stop people from coming in. Now, fortunately, he didn't have a gun, and even better than that, there were 2 police officers in the classroom when he walked in just by chance. It saved the child from being kidnapped or harmed, and to be very honest, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I did know that I was going to protect the child. So living in a gun-free zone sometimes doesn't entail safety. I'm opposed to HB 2005 for 3 reasons. Gun-free zones embolden criminals and invite crime, as I discussed. It discriminates against young people and violates their rights in Oregon law. And it overregulates the long-standing tradition of gun ownership and addressing crime. Mr. Speaker, what stops an individual from entering a public building or any building with the intent to harm others? Is it a sign? Is it a policy? Is it legislation? Or is it police or security officers with and others with concealed permits who are willing to protect others and themselves? All we have to do is review the past tragedies to answer that question, as the majority, as mentioned before, as the majority of mass shootings have occurred in gun-free zones. We have a privilege in this building to be protected by the Oregon State Police, by security, and metal detectors. If gun-free zones are an impediment to those who might harm members of this body, why do we have Oregon State police officers, detectors, and security? We are not more important than the children in our schools in gun-free zones. Is it government's first responsibility to protect and serve those we represent? After all, again, the majority of mass shootings have occurred in gun-free zones. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to beat a dead horse here, as my dad would say. But 18 and 20-year-olds are people. and they have individual rights that are protected by the Constitution and the Oregon State Constitution. 18-year-olds can go to the military, they can get married, they can legally enter into a contract. There's lots of things that 18-year-olds can already do. But Mr. Speaker, this bill unjustly discriminates against 18 to 20-year-old and violates their rights as written in both the Constitution and the Oregon Constitution. I suggest we vote no on discrimination and taking guaranteed rights away from our responsible young adults. I've worked with lots of them. Let's get tough on crime, not young people who have done no wrong except being 18 to 20. There is nothing more than age discrimination, and we have all pledged to fight against that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Osborne, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure where to start on this. House Bill 2005 has so many issues in it. I like to call it a target-rich environment. The bill is just full of reasons why it's a bad idea, in my opinion. Mr. Speaker, I just want to start out by some notes that I took, and I want to say that, I got my first gun when I was 12 years old. Amazingly, I was old enough for an abortion, but I wasn't old enough to own a gun. Mr. Speaker, my gun has never killed anybody, and I also have never had anything to do with an abortion. House Bill 2005 is full of misinformation and mistakes. It is obvious that all stakeholders were not included in this bill. And I'll give one example, but I don't want to fix this bill. I want this bill to go as a lawsuit and the unconstitutionality of it begin to rise. I don't want to fix the bill, but I will say one thing. It's obvious that all the stakeholders were not involved. And for an example, the Remington Model 7400 semi-automatic 30-06 is one of my favorite hunting calibers, and it's excluded from the ability to own that rifle. It holds 5 bullets, it shoots one at a time. I even specifically brought this up, and I was told that my people won't let us change that. I don't know who my people is, but I suspect I could figure it out. It was also heard today that the carrier of the bill said they put together a work group. The work group included the good representative from the heart of Willamette Valley, good representative from Southwest Portland and East Beaverton, and a good representative from Bend. I believe they were all gun owners. I did not hear any representatives that were Republicans, or conservatives for that matter. So I guess when I think about that, did we really put together a work group that included everybody, or did we put together a work group that basically said what they wanted it to say? Mr. Speaker, I heard loud and clear from one of those work group members this morning, the good representative from the heart of the Willamette Valley, and he said, we have a problem. Young people are not getting, I believe he said, the love and attention they need. I would agree with that. And instead of giving those young folks the attention, the mental health attention that they need, instead we're gonna disarm American citizens, Oregonians. I also heard today that more guns don't make us safer. I'm going to beat the dead horse that Representative Wright just talked about. We're surrounded by guns today, sir. We're in a public building. We're being protected by the Oregon State Police and a number of undercover officers as well. We give ourselves the right as legislators to be surrounded by guns and be protected by guns, yet just a few short weeks ago, when we pulled bills that protected our children by adding school resource officers, my colleagues from the other side of the aisle chose to vote that down. How ironic, how hypocritical could that be, in my opinion?
And again, I'm going to interrupt you right there. When you're calling members of the body hypocritical, that crosses the line of impugning the intent and the motives of the body. So please review your notes and stay away from that.
Thanks, sir. I'll do that. I was given a note this morning by a colleague and reminding me that the most aggressive and repressive gun control laws ever enacted were in the former Confederate states after the Civil War and were used to disarm black citizens while the KKK ran rampant throughout the South, not only enforcing Jim Crow laws but engaging in many lynch mobs. I would hate to see us go down that aisle. I do not want to take too long, but I do want to read something that came from, this is not testimony, this is a letter directed to me from one of my 15-year-old constituents. May I?
Please continue.
My name is Maxim Sherman. I am 15 and I live in Looking Glass, Oregon. I want to thank you for all you have done in supporting the Second Amendment for our state. I urge you to keep fighting against the bills that don't allow someone under 21 to own a firearm. Over Easter dinner, my grandpa told me about what you are up against, and I expressed concern. He encouraged me to write you. From what I understand, House Bill H. 2005, some individuals are trying to pass, will not allow citizens under 21 to own or buy their own firearm. To me, this is very restrictive and unconstitutional. When I turn 18, I am planning on joining the military, and it doesn't make sense that I'll be trusted to serve my country, but won't be allowed to own a firearm. To my understanding, this bill that could pass is not right, and I hope that it will not be put into effect. I started hunting this last year, and I enjoyed it very much. Some people in legislation are saying that citizens like myself, who are under 21, do not have the mental capacity and are not responsible enough to own a firearm. Since I've started learning
Representative,
yes.
Excuse me, looking for a yield. And Representative Elmer, you've already yielded your turn. Representative Gomberg yields his time.
Thank you, Representative. I started hunting this last year and I enjoyed it very much. Some people in legislation are saying that citizens like myself who are under 21 do not have the mental capacity and are not responsible enough to own a firearm. Since I started learning to shoot and hunt, I have been learning how to behave responsibly and safely from several men who are teaching me. Initially, I received instruction from a retired Navy SEAL who wants to make sure I am handling firearms correctly. Another man from my church is a mentor for hunting, and before each hunt, he makes sure I am going to hunt safely. We will often practice for weeks in advance before the hunt. I also took Hunter's Ed course last year and learned a lot on how to behave responsibly while hunting. I love hunting, and I want to continue even as a minor. I want to remind everybody that one of the guns that's used for hunting was restricted in this bill. Thank you for all you are doing as our representative. I really appreciate what you do. My question is, instead of restricting firearm ownership, why is not more being done to address the mental health issues that are driving these horrific acts? I wholeheartedly support what you are trying to accomplish, Representative Osborne, and will be praying for you. That coming from a 15-year-old. I'm 54 years old, and I get it. I wouldn't have got it when I was 15, but evidently we need to start paying attention to our 15-year-olds. I'll read one last thing that I wrote here. Colleagues, I'm in opposition to House Bill 2005 wholeheartedly. It's unconstitutional. This bill has, in my opinion, this bill has been sold to us as ways to further our fight against gun violence, which is something we all want. But let's be honest here, this bill will have zero effect on gun violence. House Bill 2005 is another attempt to restrict the civil liberties of all Oregonians, which I vehemently oppose. For those of you that find language in the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution to be too fluffy and not very convincing, fine. Here is Section 1, Article 1, Section 27 of our state Constitution. The people shall have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, but the military shall be kept in strict subordination to the civil power. The people shall have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves. The language could not be any clearer. Let's talk about the numbers that make up gun violence, a term that has been widely used but severely misunderstood. When people invoke the term gun violence, they are including all forms of intent: homicide, suicides, legal intervention, unintentional shootings, and undetermined shootings. Why does this matter? Because House Bill 2005 wants to curb a part of gun violence where there's few instances. The Oregon Health Authority cataloged the firearm deaths in Oregon from 2017 to 2019 and discovered that 1,613 deaths, 1,332 of those deaths, an outstanding 82.6% are suicides. 13.5% are from homicides. I share these figures with you today because House Bill 2005 includes no money or mental health treatment. I'm going to say that again. No money towards mental health treatment. What are we doing? I know how this vote will go because that's how it goes in this House. But I urge a no vote unless we do some amending to the bill and we change the bill to say this bill only applies to Multnomah County, which is where the majority of our gun violence happens. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Representative. For the discussion, Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill?
To the bill.
I think it's no secret that my work here in the legislature is informed by my being a black man born to a black mother who grew up in a black household, along with my 20 years of experience as a registered nurse. As a result of this lived experience, I think a lot about our health, our physical health, our mental health, and the health of our public systems. The health of our society is struggling under the strain of gun violence. We are facing an epidemic that is taxing our mental health, our societal health, and our healthcare system. We must act now. Gun violence is the leading cause of premature death in the U.S. and the leading cause of death in children and teens. Since the Columbine shooting in 1999, more than 349,000 students have experienced gun violence in school. That is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. Our children deserve safety and peace of mind. We all do. 38,000 people are killed each year by guns, and nearly 85,000 are injured. This type of violence disproportionately affects my peers in black and brown communities. Black Americans experience 10 times the number of gun homicides and 18 times the number of gun assault injuries in a single year than our white neighbors and friends. I have seen the devastating effects of violence firsthand when treating gunshot victims in the emergency department. The bullet does not wound a single person. It has an impact on family and friends, on work, on mental health, on everyone and everything. Long after the bullet has been removed and the scars formed, the whole community feels the impact. In my district, encompassing North and Northeast Portland, this echoing of trauma and grief is still happening. 3 young men were shot and killed in broad daylight just over a month ago, not far from my home. Their families are hurting. Classmates and friends are grieving, and neighbors are scared. These lives will never, ever be the same. This pain will never fully go away for those impacted. Now, no one is trying to take away guns from law-abiding gun owners, but we need sensible legislation for gun safety and violence prevention. We owe it to the families of the victims in my district, to the parents in Nashville, to the survivors in Louisville and Texas. It is too easy to become numb to this and look away. Please don't. Look instead to our youth. Even though they should be playing with their friends, studying for tests, making the soccer team, or practicing for the band, it is our youth, especially in communities of color, who are leading a movement to change the tide of gun violence. Recently, over 7,000 people peacefully protested gun violence in Nashville, calling on their legislators to pass common sense gun violence prevention legislation. Here today, we can make that a reality for the people across our state. This gun violence prevention package is going to save lives. It will keep guns out of the wrong hands and prevent needless deaths. This will help to create a world where our children and communities do not fear for their lives, where they do not have to think about what their last message to their parents would say. After he was expelled for peacefully protesting for gun violence, prevention, former Tennessee State Representative Justin Pearson said, "The fight for justice is worth it."
Excuse me, Representative Reschke, for what purpose are you in the privilege queue?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to raise a point of order.
And your point of order, please.
Events that happened in another state are not relevant to the bill that is being discussed about Oregonians.
Thank you for your point of order, Representative. We've been giving a tremendous amount of latitude over the last few days because this is something that, for instance, is not related to a dump truck accident, that we're going to go ahead and allow that to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Picking up where I left off, after he was expelled for peacefully protesting for gun violence prevention, former Tennessee State Representative Justin Pearson said, "The fight for justice is worth it." I believe several generations from now, we will look back at this moment as a turning point in history for this country. I believe so too. I urge your aye vote on House Bill 2005B. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We are going to take a recess until 1:15 to gather lunch. Representative Greg Smith, motion, please.
Yes, sir. Colleagues, I move we recess until 1:15 later today.
Representative Greg Smith moves the House stand in recess until 1:15 today, May 2nd, 2023, without objection. The House is in recess. The quorum is present. Message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker, I am directed by the President to inform you the Senate has passed House Bills 2146, 2507, 2530, 3307, and passed the following House bills as amended by the Senate. House Bills 2982, 3412. Mr. Speaker, I am directed by the President to inform you that the Senate has failed House Bill 3076.
Having recessed under the order of special order of business, the House will continue under that order of business. When we recess, we are under discussion of House Bill 2005B. We'll continue with that. Further discussion? Representative McIntire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, I would like to bring up again ORS 171.134, the readability test for legislative digests and summaries, and read the actual ORS. It states any measured digest.
I'm going to go ahead and interrupt you. I do apologize because that is unrelated to the underlying bill and the passage of the bill. That would not be germane to the bill.
Okay. Can I say what the score is?
Again, that would not be germane to the bill.
Got it. I am going to tell you that my comments today are at a 62.34 reading score. That is an 8th and 9th grade level, and I am going to be reading words in plain English so we can all have an example of what that looks like. Colleagues, this bill does nothing to stop criminals from accessing guns. I'd like to ask, who performs most of the gun violence in the state? Criminals. Will passing a law stop criminals from committing crime? Let me ask you, what stops you from committing a crime? Other than your moral compass, I would say consequences. If you want to actually prevent gun crimes, then instead of going after law-abiding citizens who would courageously stop a violent crime, go after the criminals. Make the consequences of gun crimes so severe that the fear of God is put into criminals and they will think twice before blatantly defying the law. Colleagues, in reference to school, the phrase, "don't bring a knife to a gunfight," when we leave our most vulnerable, unprotected in a brick and mortar box, we have set them up for failure if their safety is ever under threat. Again, if criminals who become criminals for a myriad of reasons know that a school is armed with law-abiding, responsible gun owners, they will think twice before going into that school. This bill will not stop criminals from having guns. This bill will prevent law-abiding citizens from their constitutional rights. I urge a no vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Boshart Davis.
Mr. Speaker, questions to Co-Carrier Rep. Evans, which he was given previously.
Question to Carrier Evans. Do you yield?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll yield one at a time.
He does, one at a time.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, what other Oregon laws make a distinction between activities adults can engage in?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for that question. There are a number of different things in Oregon that have to do with the differential age and the exercise of rights thereof. Consumption of alcohol, consumption of marijuana, and the use of tobacco being chief among them. I'm actually looking for the statutes for those, but I think those are the three areas that I'd like to focus that particular answer on. I have the ORSs if you want them.
Further question to the Carrier Representative?
Further question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, is there any historical nexus for an age-based restriction? Is there any text, history, or tradition to support an age-based discrimination policy for firearms?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the person carrying the question. Well, actually, when it comes to age-based differentiation, I'm not sure I'd call it discrimination, but differentiation, U.S. Code 18 U.S. Code 922B1 actually talks about handguns being only for those that are 21 years old and older. There's other situations throughout the law having to do with age-based distinctions, but usually related to other types of behavior. But I'll stick with that one.
One final question.
Yeah, one final question to the Carrier. Does the Carrier yield? Representative, do you yield to the final question?
Of course.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, are there any exemptions under this bill for the lawful use of self-defense by someone aged 18 to 20?
Mr. Speaker, and to the question asker, thank you. Yes and no is the answer. Here's what I mean by that. The weapons that an 18-year-old can purchase under the bill can be used for self-defense. In fact, when I went into combat, I usually had a shotgun with me because that was the nature of my job. That said, hunting weapons can be used. Anybody on the wrong end of a 30-30 certainly would think that that's a weapon for death. In terms of other weapons that are available, there's an entire range of non-lethals, which I actually brought today if people wanted to see other alternatives.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill?
To the bill.
Colleagues, today I rise in opposition to House Bill 2005B. At a time of rising crime, stripping Oregonians of their rights to self-defense is the exactly wrong approach. To be clear, this is not a gun violence prevention bill. This is a gun regulation bill. As elected legislators, we are elected to create laws that positively impact our communities, districts, friends, and families. This bill does none of those. This bill strips rights from law-abiding adults seeking ways to protect themselves. Per the floor letter on your desk from Representative Kramer, these people are increasingly women, minorities, and those who identify as liberal. House Bill 2005B will make thousands of Oregonians into felons overnight. I want this body to understand, all of whom have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, that this bill openly and willfully ignores the Supreme Court's jurisprudence in the wake of New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. The Bruin decision ruled that people have a constitutional right to firearms for self-defense. Taking away an 18, 19, and 20-year-old's right to purchase a firearm is illegal and dangerous. OAR 839-005-0000 states that it is the policy of the state of Oregon that unlawful discrimination on the basis of Oregon's protected classes is a matter of state concern, and that such discrimination threatens individual rights and privileges and menaces the institutions and foundations of a free democratic state. Amongst race, sex, and religion, age is also a protected class. I want to share a story about a staff member in this building. In the summer of 2018, she was living alone for the first time in her life. She was renting a studio apartment where the bedroom door was also the front door, just feet from her bed. Neighbors warned her that the neighborhood was rough, with frequent homeless and gang activity, but that was the apartment she could afford. These warnings made her consider buying a firearm to protect herself, but she couldn't afford one. One night, she had an unhinged man start banging on her door, demanding to be let in. She grew up in rural Oregon. Her family could hear the sirens in town, but they knew that the police would never be able to save them in time. She felt that familiar fear as someone was attempting to beat down her door. She remembers wishing she had skipped some meals to afford that firearm that would have given her a sense of security that night. Every night since obtaining a firearm, she has slept with it by her nightstand, and she gets a lot better sleep because of it. What did that young girl do to get her right to self-defense taken from her? What did the countless young single women under the age of 21 in this state do to be banned from protecting themselves from dangerous people who seek to harm them, like this staffer? Colleagues, I have daughters that are 17 and 20, and a 15-year-old. My 20-year-old lives alone, and my 17-year-old will live on her own next year. As their mother, I want them to be able to protect themselves when their dad and I cannot protect them anymore. House Bill 2002B continues to strip Oregonians, including my daughters, of their right to public self-defense. Studies have shown that those with concealed carry permits commit very few crimes. Statistically, concealed carry holders are self-selected to represent one of the safest subgroups within American society. They are not the ones committing the heinous crimes that we all want to stop. All this bill does is prohibit those who want to lawfully defend themselves, their property, and their family from doing so. Poor and minority communities have more than their fair share of crime and less than their fair share of police presence. Those who are most vulnerable to being harmed by violent crime are the ones who need this right the most. Again, House Bill 2005B disrespects them, and it leaves them vulnerable. Very few are speaking up for them, so I will. House Bill 2005 would make thousands of law-abiding Oregonians felons overnight by banning unserialized firearms. Under the Supreme Court jurisprudence, it is hard to argue that a ban on homemade firearms made for personal use and not for sale is constitutional. As this body has moved to reduce criminal penalties for many other crimes, this bill would make criminals out of law-abiding citizens who own these firearms and use them responsibly. U.S. Constitution includes the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and the Oregon's Constitution is even stronger. The people have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state. It is hard to see this bill as anything but an unconstitutional attack on my constituents' right to self-defense. I urge a no vote.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion. Representative Pham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill?
To the bill.
Colleagues, I rise today in support of House Bill 2005, which will curb gun violence in Oregon by reducing access and exposure to dangerous, untraceable firearms. On the day of the horrific elementary school shooting in Uvalde, Texas last May, I was speaking to children at Marysville Elementary School in my district, and they asked me, what can I do to keep them safe from guns? I receive calls and emails from constituents and neighbors every week asking what more can we do to keep guns off the streets of East Portland. Mothers whose children are afraid to sleep in their own beds. Students who are exhausted and angry at federal inaction in the face of shooting after shooting. Families grieving parents, aunts and uncles, cousins, and children who are gone too soon. My district is currently mourning the tragic death of 17-year-old Eskinder Tamra, a Franklin High School student who was shot and killed driving between his two jobs at Fred Meyer and Taco Bell. Eskinder was remembered at his burial on Easter Sunday as a loving, kind, hardworking brother, son, student, and friend. I am heartbroken by this loss to our community, and while I know that no piece of legislation will undo the reality of Esconder's death, I am motivated to act to prevent future similar events. While the gun violence epidemic touches all of our communities, it does not impact us equally. 70% of the people who are killed by gun violence in the Portland area are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Every member of our community deserves to feel safe. Our children are entitled to live free from fear and violence. Our schools should be places of learning and stability. Our streets and neighborhoods should be safe to gather, to travel, and to be in community. House Bill 2005 will make Oregon safer. We don't have to live in fear. Colleagues, I urge your aye vote on this important bill.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Before I begin, Mr. Speaker, may I have permission to use a visual aid?
So that Representative Smith requests that the rules be suspended and that he be allowed to use a visual aid. Is there any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, today I have nothing profound to share, nothing we haven't heard already. As a matter of fact, I know the words I'm going to share today are not going to change a vote. I know that. The die's been cast. But I do have an obligation, Mr. Speaker, to speak on behalf of the constituents in District 57, which include Umatilla County, Morrow County, Gillum County, Sherman County, Wheeler County, Wasco County, Jefferson County, and a portion of Marion. I feel as if I represent a large swath of the state, even though my district is still smaller than the good representative from District 60. Colleagues, 2 weeks ago, down in Ways and Means, I had a chance to listen to Senator Lou Frederick, and it was powerful. It was powerful what he shared. During his conversation with the committee, he talked about the difference between his community and the community of Burns. And while this won't be exact, effectively what he said was, when I see a person carrying a gun down the street in Burns, I assume they're going hunting for a duck or deer or something. When I see a young man carrying a gun in my neighborhood, I get scared. Colleagues, let me share with you why I say that. There's a famous book, New York Times bestseller for 10 years, called The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. It's written by Dr. Stephen Covey, New York Times bestseller. It's one of 100 most influential books. One of the habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to this body, I feel like we're missing out on that habit a little bit. I know I haven't done everything I could to seek first to understand. The 7th habit is to synergize. And what synergy means, colleagues, is where 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. It can mean 3, 4, it can mean a dozen, it can be 1,000. Colleagues, I stand ready today to work with you. I stand ready to work with you on behavioral health funding. We just had a bill to be considered, was it 899? Hotline. We're going to raise some money. I stand ready to work with 988. Thank you. I stand corrected. My heart's in the right place. I stand ready to work with you on this. Colleagues, but with that said, I have to share with you House Bill 2005B is really contrary to the desires of the folks in my district. Let's get to the root of the issue. Well, let's not yet. Let's continue to be understood. Colleagues, when your kids go to a football game, How far do they drive? What's West Salem to McNary or Barlow to Gresham? I don't know, Aloha to Beaverton. So when, 10 miles? 5 miles? 2 miles? Mr. Speaker, when my daughter decides she wants to go visit her friends in John Day, it's a 2.5-hour drive over a mountain, quite often in the dark. One gas station. Why can't I protect my daughter? What'd she do wrong? My constituents in Dufur, they want to go celebrate Halloween in Ione, 140-mile drive. Would you send your daughter 140 miles away over the mountain without any form of protection? I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I just want to share that with you, gang. We have to seek first to understand. And so my heart went out to the senator when he shared what he shared. That's not my reality. And maybe I can't understand that reality, but I want you to understand mine. So the question the folks in District 57 have is, what did they do wrong? Should have had a packet of this. This is my mom. My mom has a pistol. It just makes her feel good. It just makes her feel good knowing when she's alone in the house, she has her pistol. She'd never use it. My mom's the sweetest, nicest lady you'd ever find, and, well, she has MS, so she wouldn't be able to get to the pistol very fast. What'd she? My daughter is at the University of Arizona. The University of Arizona is about 50 miles south of our national border. And in that area, there's high crime rate, Mr. Speaker. And she likes to carry a pistol with her when she's away at school. Why can't I let her do that? When she comes home, what is she going to do with the pistol? She's now going to break the law. That young lady has done everything correctly. I've done everything correctly. My wife has done everything correctly. I've got my sealed handgun permit right here, signed by our sheriff, Ken Matlack. My daughter's taken her Eddie Eagle course. We've done the, the hunting, hunter safety, thank you, Representative, class. If you look in your packet, there's pictures of my daughter learning how to use a gun. In this case, it's a little BB gun, and this is years ago. What'd she do wrong? This is a young lady who went to FBLA, FFA, played volleyball, got decent grades, good enough to get into University of Arizona, and now we're going to tell her, sorry, Charlie, you can't protect yourself. Mr. Speaker, what did she do wrong? That's the question my constituents are asking. What did they do wrong? My folks in Umatilla County, Morrow County, Gillum County, Sherman County, Wheeler County, Wasco County, Jefferson County, and Marion County. They want to know, what did they do wrong? I stand ready to work with each and every one of you to fix the behavioral health issue in this state. I've cast hard votes. I've raised revenue for these purposes. I've done it, and I'll do it again. But we have to understand where each other's coming from. This is my beautiful daughter. my beautiful daughter, you mean to tell me I'm going to send her 120 miles with one gas station to John Day? What type of dad? I would never do that. Mr. Speaker, we're away from home quite a bit. Down here in Salem, taking care of our legislative duties. Do I not have a right to let my wife protect herself the way she wants to be protected? The way she wants to be protected. Again, colleagues, I'm ready to help you. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves, work with each and every one of you to find the resources to address behavioral health. Because you know what? That's what we said we were going to do 2 years ago. Senate Bill 554B. Let me read a little piece of it. Requires a person who owns or possesses a firearm while not carried under the control of the person or an authorized person to secure the firearm with an endangered trigger or cable lock. So we have to lock up our guns. And you know what? We said that was going to solve it. If we lock up our guns, these issues were going to go away. Made it a Class A violation for a minor obtains an unsecured firearm. So my daughter's already a criminal. What'd she do wrong? Colleagues, taking away the rights of folks who have done nothing wrong isn't the solution. Colleagues, the solution is us rolling up our sleeves, all 60 of us, and addressing behavioral health, addressing mental health, raising the revenue to do it. I've been here 22 years, and all I hear is rhetoric that we're going to take care of behavioral health. Well, when are we going to do it, Mr. Speaker? The time is now. Don't make my daughter a criminal. Mr. Speaker, I have the utmost respect for you. Thank you for letting me share my thoughts.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion. Representative Goodwin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill?
To the bill.
Colleagues, our Constitution protects the rights of our citizens to keep and bear arms. In fact, the Constitution specifically delineates that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In my view, the bill before this body is in direct contradiction to our fundamental constitutional protections. And our judicial system has already addressed how and why overzealous firearms regulations are unconstitutional. In fact, Second Amendment litigation has seemingly increased in recent decades. For example, 2008, the Supreme Court addressed Second Amendment regulations in District of Columbia versus Heller. The court invalidated that overzealous regulation. Then in 2010, the court invalidated yet another overbroad firearm regulation and determined that the Second Amendment applies to the states. But because state legislatures and lower courts continue to ignore the review standard of the court, and the states have continued to propose broad regulations, the court determined the review standard in New York Rifle versus Bruin. There, the court concluded that if the plain text of the Second Amendment covers an individual's conduct, the Constitution presumptively protects the conduct. The government must then justify its regulation by demonstrating that the regulation is consistent with historical firearms regulations. I just don't see how we get there under this bill. Additionally, I think there are granular issues with this bill's language, including, for example, with the definition of adjacent grounds or antique firearms. In other words, this legislation is simply overbroad and constitutionally suspect. Passage of this bill could open our state to lawsuits, such as those decided by the Supreme Court, but also in other states such as Washington, Texas, New Jersey, and Delaware. My goal in this building is to represent the people of my community and the interest as they share them with me. Given the legitimate constitutional concerns inherent in this bill and the overbroad and burdensome regulations, I cannot support this legislation. I am an adamant no.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Scharf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill?
To the bill.
House Bill 2005B may be well-meaning, but it will have unintended consequences far outweighing any perceived benefits. As I've contemplated this measure and the multitude of unintended consequences that it will create, I find myself returning to the same word, a word that I've used on this floor before: privilege. As we all entered the Capitol this morning, we were greeted by security, placed our bags through scanners, and walked through a metal detector. Anyone who enters this building must go through this screening to ensure their physical safety and the safety of everyone inside. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who greatly appreciates the time and effort our Capitol security invests in our safety. My child, your child, our children went to school today, but they received no such privileged protections. The youth of our state's future deserve a safe place to learn, yet House Bill 2005B does nothing to protect them. It does nothing to give them the same safety and privilege that we all enjoy here today. In fact, it makes them ducks sitting on a gun-free pond. This year, the legislative administrative budget for security services for the state capitol alone is $3.8 million. $3.8 million provides us with the privilege of having security staff that is trained and equipped to maintain the security of the Capitol building and all who work and visit here daily. For some perspective, the average walk-through metal detector costs about $4,500, and the median salary for a school resource officer in Oregon is a roughly mere $50,000. Providing every school in Oregon with 2 metal detectors and 1 SRO would cost 1.5% of the security budget for this building, a rather modest price to pay to provide our children, your children, my child, the same privilege that we enjoy here. State budgets reflect priorities, and right now, we are prioritizing our safety over the safety of our children. Instead of investing in the security of our schools and protecting our children, House Bill 2005B will cost the state hundreds of thousands of dollars in litigation. The state of Oregon is doing so currently in defending Measure 114 in 2 separate court cases, one in U.S. District Court and the other in the U.S. Supreme Court. Both these cases are still awaiting trial, which is scheduled for June and September. In the 6 months since these cases began, the state has spent over $500,000, and we're closer to the beginning than we are to a resolution. House Bill 2005B will cost the state even more in expensive, time-consuming litigation, dollars that could be much better spent equipping our schools with proper security. But our school children are not the only people that this measure will fail. House Bill 2005B will inhibit law-abiding Oregonians the ability to defend themselves. While it is important to prevent criminals from obtaining firearms, it is also important to remember that law-abiding citizens, those like the ones here today that I spoke to earlier, have a right to protect themselves. The vast majority of gun owners are responsible and pose no threat to the public, no threat to your safety, my safety, or the safety of our children. But by allowing local governments to designate public buildings as gun-free zones will unnecessarily disarm our law-abiding gun owners. Without extensive investment into security personnel and equipment for every gun-free building, This measure will do nothing more than increase the vulnerability of public buildings to violent attacks. A sign posted saying "No guns allowed" will create a false sense of security, while advertising to criminals that everyone inside is an unarmed, defenseless human being. This is a far cry from the privilege of our robust security afforded to us here in our privileged, gun-free building. Colleagues, in closing, I support efforts to reduce gun violence, but arbitrary measures that transgress our fundamental rights are not a solution. Instead, we should give Oregonians every opportunity to legally protect themselves, including the right to concealed carry in public buildings and the surrounding areas. As for those most vulnerable, our children, my child, your child, who deserve our protection, we should extend to them the same privilege that we ourselves are enjoying at this very moment. I urge a no vote today on House Bill 2005B and ask this body to look for real ways to protect our children, my child, your child, and to protect the constitutional rights of Oregon gun owners. This mom demands this body take real action, not feel-good action. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Stout.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
I want to start by saying thank you to everybody here today. The stories, the passion, the concerns, they're all real. I listened intently to every one of them. And much like our representative said, we do not all relate in the same way, but I still think it's important that we listen and understand. So I rise today, though, in strong opposition to this bill. I can stand here and speak at length about the privileges, rights, and freedoms our nation was founded on with application to the issues with this bill, yet my colleagues have already touched on that in various ways. For that matter, is there anything I can say that has not already been said today? Is there anything I can do to change the outcome? These are the questions I ask myself, and the answer to them both is probably not. Like all of us, I've been called to serve here and speak up in defending the life, liberty, and freedoms of all, not just a few. Our right to bear arms is still today an inalienable right, and this legislation today is still, on its face, unconstitutional. There are many parts of this omnibus bill in front of us that we have already been ruled on by the higher courts, and in doing so, these courts have stated that consistency with the United States, quote, historical tradition of firearms regulations, unquote, must be observed. Let us look at just one example that is clearly speaking to the main summary of this legislation presented before us today. U.S. District Judge Joseph Goodwin ruled this last October that a federal ban on possessing a gun with its serial number removed is unconstitutional. A federal ban is unconstitutional and is not consistent with firearm regulations and laws. Why are we moving a bill that clearly will be challenged and in many minds so clearly ignores federal law? We have heard it said we need to protect our kids, and this bill will do that. How do we know? In my opinion, this is a guess at best, yet I do not discredit the efforts or the work here to save lives and protect our children. It has already been spoken to that we here in this House called several bills to the floor that would do just this, protect our kids and add missing or increased safety measures in our schools. That group of possible life-saving and common sense legislation concepts was stopped dead in their tracks and were not allowed to come to discussion for a vote. I simply ask, why not? Our representative citizens are tired, nay, I say fed up and frustrated on both sides of this aisle and this issue. We swore on an oath to protect the rights and liberties of all our constituents, and I can't help but feel this legislation is trampling on those rights. With that, I will be a no vote today, and I can only urge others to do the same. I as well want to leave us with a couple of thoughts here today, and one we have already heard, but it bears repeating. Benjamin Franklin stated it well decades ago, and I feel it still applies today. Let these final thoughts be a reminder of who we are and what we were asked to do here today in this building, and for that matter, every day. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. He that would live in peace and at ease must not speak all he knows or judge what all he sees. Don't throw stones at your neighbors if your own windows are glass. And finally, well done is better than well said. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Mannix.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
The narrator in Pyramus and Thisbe, which is a play within a play, A Midsummer's Night's Dream, begins with, "Gentles, perchance you wonder at this show, yet wonder on till truth make all things plain." In that situation, it took some time to understand the truth of what is going on, and we are all seekers of truth in this body, truly seekers of truth, and we come from different perspectives, and I appreciate the perspectives that we've heard today. But I'd like to bring up the perspective of history. In 1987, the Oregon Supreme Court held in State versus Kessler that the state constitutional firearms rights provides broader protection than the Second Amendment of the United States Constitution, and held that a law banning the carrying of concealed weapons violated the Oregon Constitution. That decision came down in 1987. In January 1989, I became a member of this body as a member of the Democrat Party at the time, and I stood in this spot to work on a bill that Speaker Vera Katz had put together to address the issue of that ruling by the Supreme Court and to address other firearms rights issues. For example, until 1989, felons could possess shotguns in Oregon. Why? Because when we started out as a state, after you were let out of the state penitentiary, you needed to hunt to feed your family. In any event, a comprehensive bill was passed right here in 1989 that established the concealed handgun permit law for the state. And it was very carefully balanced so that we would require that you have a clean background check, that in the application process you demonstrate that you were trained in the safe use of firearms and you understood the firearms laws. And then the sheriff, having that application, and if you've completed all of those requirements, shall issue a permit. Now, we allowed in that legislation some very limited restrictions, including the opportunity for the courts for their own protection. We have a lot of people in public safety issues coming and going to restrict concealed handguns. But we have in front of us today a bill that goes well beyond that. We've already said concealed handguns cannot be brought in the Capitol, and maybe one can make a case for that because of the way things go. But this bill says that, in essence, as to all state properties, and yes, counties and cities that choose to do this, and as to all universities, concealed handguns are not only forbidden within the buildings, but they're forbidden on the grounds. Oh, we make a distinction. It's a felony if you bring it inside the building. It's just a Class A misdemeanor if you're outside on the grounds. That is the kind of situation we're in now with this legislation, which I think encroaches upon the rights of our citizens who've gone through the process to get a concealed handgun permit. But there's more. We've already heard a bit about the United States Supreme Court decisions, so I'll only touch upon it briefly. But the United States Supreme Court has made it clear that we have a right to defend ourselves and to have the resort to firearms to defend ourselves. But then we have in front of us a bill that makes it extremely difficult to carry out that right, and I'll give a few examples. There's some things in this bill that have not been considered. We include violations as part of the record that might enhance penalties for those who are accused of violating some of these firearms laws. Now, violations do not include any penalty of imprisonment. The Supreme Court of Oregon has ruled that any time you have a charge that could lead to imprisonment, we have to provide public defense services. So I'm ready to hear the litigation and the fight to provide for more public defenders anytime someone's charged with a violation under this act, under this bill, because if they have another offense, they could end up having a criminal charge for having previously had a violation. It enhances penalties from the violations up to misdemeanors and then ultimately to felonies. There's a public defender cost, and I haven't heard any discussion of that. It's not a constitutional issue, except you have a right to a public defender in circumstances where you may be incarcerated. We create a massive regulatory complex as to unfinished frame or receivers as to their serial numbers. And you've already heard...
Excuse me one moment, Representative. Thank you. Please continue.
We create this complex scheme as to unfinished frame or receivers as to their serial numbers, and you've already heard discussion about the impact that would have on Oregonians. Now, there is a situation involving whether or not someone under the age of 21 is going to be able to possess a firearm, because you cannot knowingly possess a firearm, meaning know you've got it, unless you have certain specific exceptions which apply. And if you take a look at page 5, lines 27 and on, talk to your children and see if they can follow this one. Well, you will be allowed to possess a firearm if it's a single-shot rifle, whether centerfire or rimfire, a double-barreled shotgun, a repeating rifle, whether centerfire or rimfire, that has a bolt, lever, pump, straight pull, or revolving action, a rifle with an attached tubular magazine designed to accept and capable of operating only with .22 caliber rimfire ammunition. I'll stop there. There's a whole list of provisions. So watch out if your 18, 19, or 20-year-old didn't figure out this grocery list. And another example that I'll throw out of the regulatory complex that we've created here has to do with whether or not someone can possess a firearm on public buildings or in public grounds if they're in the parking garage. Get this, and if you want to, you can look at page 10 of the bill. The public building exception regarding firearms in a locked vehicle only applies that you do lock your vehicle, that it's in a parking lot or a parking facility that constitutes or is a part of a public building, the firearm is unloaded and locked in the trunk, or it's in a locked container. Any ammunition is not stored in the same trunk or container. What I'm getting at is we're creating the opportunities for people to be law violators if they've tried to put their firearm in their trunk and locked it up, but they left the ammunition in the same container. You see what I'm getting at? We've created a complex series of episodes where law-abiding citizens will be found to have violated the law. This is in an effort where we're trying to encourage law-abiding citizens to work with us to enforce the laws regarding public safety. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go over the Supreme Court decisions, which I already mentioned have been discussed, but I'm back to that 1987 decision by the Oregon Supreme Court. That 1987 decision is still on the books, State versus Kessler. What are we doing today about carrying concealed firearms? And what are we doing today about all of the firearms rights of Oregonians? We are setting ourselves up, and you've heard this before, for litigation. And we didn't have to do it this way. We could have addressed misconduct. As one of my colleagues pointed out, we could be addressing all of the behavioral issues in terms of mental health. Instead, we're getting after a tool that is used by law-abiding citizens in their own defense. And if we're trying to get after those who are violating the law and the use of those tools, I would love to see us have a bill that enhances penalties for carrying a firearm in the commission of a crime, for brandishing a firearm in the commission of a crime, for pulling the trigger and firing a firearm. Keep moving the penalties up. If you hit somebody, move the penalties up. If you murder somebody, double the penalties. We're not penalizing people for the unlawful use of firearms. We are penalizing good citizens who will be treated as unlawful for possessing firearms in a variety of circumstances where they will find it very hard to contemplate how do they follow the law. With all of that, I urge a no vote on this bill, and I like the comment about let's roll up our sleeves and see what we can do to deal with violence. And it's not just firearms violence in our society. We have much work to do, and I thank you for the time, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Representative. Further discussion. Representative Hudson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill?
To the bill.
As a teacher, a father, and a representative from a community impacted by school gun violence, I ask for your support on House Bill 2005. We teachers are doing what we can to keep students safe, holding lockdown drills, training staff, teaching students how to run, hide, and fight an armed intruder. And after each tragedy, I wonder whether we will make a real policy change instead of bemoaning that there's nothing we can do. Reducing school shootings is obviously a priority for me, and this bill works to prevent them, as ghost guns are being used increasingly in school gun violence incidents. Yet, school hardening has become a $3 billion industry, and our children are still dying. Furthermore, there have been 18 instances of school gun violence so far this year, but over 200 mass shootings nationwide. We must do what empirically works, and that means focusing on the guns themselves, not on schools only. In 2021, the states with the highest total rates of gun-related deaths, counting murders, suicides, and all other categories tracked by the CDC, were the states with the laxest gun laws. Keeping guns out of the wrong hands is the key to reducing violence. You can't deny the data. I was proud to see the Oregon legislature react swiftly to the shooting in Tennessee by considering and adopting policies such as the Emergency Notifications Bill, aimed at keeping parents and guardians informed and ensuring transparency and adequate communications within a reasonable time frame. I'm happy to see legislators share this priority by approving it unanimously and sending it over to the Senate, with over 30 bipartisan chief and regular sponsors. And I'm happy to see we're also taking steps to prioritize behavioral and mental health this session. But none of that matters if we don't take action and get guns out of the wrong hands. House Bill 2005 is a next logical step, prioritizing and addressing the root cause of school safety and gun violence. As legislators, we're tasked with finding innovative solutions to the issues Oregonians face, even if they are difficult decisions. Colleagues, I ask for your support.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion. Representative Kropf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill?
To the bill.
Colleagues, I rise in support of the Gun Violence Prevention Bill, House Bill 2005B. Gun violence has pervaded every aspect of American life. Shootings have taken place in our schools, our streets, our grocery stores, our shopping centers, and our places of worship. It's simply not acceptable. I know that each of us are impacted when we read about gun violence tragedies that have happened here in Oregon and across the state, from the shootings at Clackamas Town Center, the Bend Safeway, the Umpqua Community College, Reynolds and Thurston High Schools. Sadly, there are too many places to name that have been impacted by gun violence. And certainly, the list goes beyond Portland. In the House Judiciary Committee, we had robust public discussion and debate on this bill. And we heard from supporters from across the state. Now, admittedly, there was different viewpoints on this bill. But a common thread from what I heard during those hearings was that we all deserve to live in safe communities. And we heard a number of different ideas, just like we've heard today on the floor, about how we create safe, strong, thriving communities. And many of those ideas I agree with. There's not one simple solution to fostering public safety. It's a combination of the connection we share with one another and how we encourage and support others in our community. And public safety also comes from the services available and the related investments that we make in those areas. Respectfully, I'm going to disagree with the sentiment that I heard earlier this morning, that we are not going to do anything to tackle crime and help create safer communities this session. I look around this chamber and I see the personification of the work we are going to do. I'm sitting next to an educator. We will be making record investments in our schools. I see a social worker, and I've heard a number of people on this floor talk about the investments we need to make in behavioral health. I see nurses and doctors and dentists who provide needed physical health care. I see former law enforcement officers, and as a former prosecutor, I know how important law enforcement is to help creating safe communities. And I see small business owners who create jobs and economic opportunities. And I see housing advocates to make sure everybody has a safe place to live. Investing in affordable housing, our education system, our mental health and behavioral health infrastructure can and will make our communities safer and healthier. However, to tackle gun violence, we need to couple these actions with common sense gun safety laws. When crafting gun safety policy, it is important to me that we respect responsible gun owners. I share a common story with a number of people on this floor. I was raised in a hunting family. I was taught from a young age how to handle a firearm. I've been a gun owner since I was a young man. I carried forward the lessons I learned as a minor about how to be safe and responsible with a firearm. We need to ensure that our firearms legislation encourages safe, responsible gun ownership and takes unsafe weapons off our streets. I appreciate that even members who disagree with this bill have acknowledged that the Second Amendment is not absolute, and that reasonable regulations regarding firearms are permitted and have been permitted under both our state and federal constitution. House Bill 2005 builds on our prior work that ensures background checks, the creation of red flag laws, and safe storage requirement. In simple terms, this bill says undetectable and untraceable guns have no place in our community. The prevalence of these types of guns endangers our communities and impedes the work of our law enforcement. This bill empowers local communities to make the same decisions they do now about their schools, whether or not they want their public libraries, their city halls, and other public buildings to be gun-free. And lastly, we put some reasonable limits on the possession of the most dangerous weapons, like handguns and semi-automatic rifles like AR-15s. We do not stop people under the age of 21 from growing up and hunting like I did. We do not take away guns from guns that people already own. Representative Smith, I heard your statements about your daughter. Under this bill, if you currently lawfully possess a firearm, you will be able to continue to possess that firearm moving forward after the effective date of this bill. And we do not criminalize self-defense. So in August of this last year, we had a shooting in Bend. Two people in my town were murdered. The perpetrator was a 20-year-old. At the scene, the police recovered over 100 shell casings. I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this, but we were lucky to only have two people murdered that day. They also recovered an AR-15. And at the time, that was lawfully purchased by that 20-year-old. With the passage of this bill, that will not be allowable anymore. We can respect the rights of responsible gun owners. We can invest in needed services that are going to help make us safer. And we can have common sense rules about firearms as we collectively work to create safer communities. I urge your support of this measure.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Breese-Iverson.
Mr. Speaker, to the bill.
To the bill.
I echo what my colleagues have expressed relating to the legitimate legal concerns that this bill before us presents. Under this bill, we are restricting possession and access to firearms for legal adults, while also restricting access, sale, and manufacture of firearms simply due to the nature of the product. This, in my opinion, is a clear infringement on the constitutional protections afforded to Oregonians and to Americans. But don't take my word for it. Consider what the U.S. Supreme Court has said on this issue. Just last year, in New York Rifle versus Bruin, the court determined that a text, history, and tradition test govern laws restricting the right to keep and bear arms, invalidating any gun laws that fail to meet its standard. With the guiding instructions and principles given in Bruin, and the inevitable reviewing court must answer only two questions. First, does the Second Amendment's plain text cover the challenged provision? And second, whether the historical evidence supports the restriction. I challenge this body to consider why we would pass a law that does not satisfy those two prongs. Why pass a law that violates the plain text of the Constitution? And why pass a law that does not have any historical or evidentiary support? But in this action is simply consistent with what we have seen from other states in the aftermath of Bruin. Overzealous state legislators enacting harsh and constitutionally suspect firearms regulations, only for the measure to end up in court. Consider Minnesota, New Jersey, and Texas, which have recently seen state laws prohibiting firearm access to 18 and 20-year-olds struck down. Consider our neighbors to the north in Washington, who have recently enacted a sweeping gun omnibus bill, not dissimilar to our own here. And there was a lawsuit filed in federal court almost as soon as the governor's ink was dry after signing it. This bill is simple. It is constitutionally suspect, likely unconstitutionally in its entirety, and undoubtedly leading the state to immediate litigation. Litigation that the state will lose because there is simply no jurisdiction for a state regulation of a constitutionally protected right. The state would never take such a drastic measure against the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, or the Sixth Amendment. The Second Amendment should be no different. I strongly urge a no vote on House Bill 2005B.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion. Representative Reschke.
Mr. Speaker, I move a call of the House.
Representative Reschke has requested a call of the House. He is joined by Representative Mannix, Representative Stout, Representative Javity, Representative Scharf, Representative Helfrich, Representative Bobby Levy, Representative Kramer. The doorkeepers will bar the doors, the Sergeant-at-Arms will attend, and the clerk will open the voting system and determine the presence of the membership. Representative Morgan, you got to come in. This is your own party doing this to you. Don't look at me. All members subject to a call are present. Excused, Hebe. Further discussion? Seeing none. Representative Reynolds, do you wish to close?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Glad you're all here to hear this. Drop my pen. On this second day of difficult debate, I have to bring up the allegory, right? We can put a fence at the top of a cliff, or we can send the ambulance down to the valley. And we've clearly forgone the fence and are sending ambulances in far too rapid succession. But it doesn't have to be this way, and today, the Gun Violence Prevention Bill, we will have a chance to make a difference and prevent more deaths. And I want to be clear, that's why I'm here, gun safety legislation works. And how do we know this to be true? The proof is found in examining the relationship between state laws and gun deaths. The stronger the state gun violence prevention laws, the lower the rate of deaths from guns. For example, California has a score of 86 for gun loss strength and experiences 9 gun deaths per 100,000 citizens per year. It's about a third lower than the national average. And at the far other end of this spectrum, Mississippi rates a 3 compared to California's 86, where 34 out of 100,000 people in Mississippi die. This is 4 times the rate of California, more than twice the national rate. In Oregon, our score is 66, where 15 out of 100,000 Oregonians die by gun violence every year. This is around the national average. It's heartbreaking to acknowledge that the highest rates of gun violence in our state, they're in Josephine, Klamath, Curry, Baker, and Crook counties. Are you comfortable with Oregon being in the average range? Because I am not. Reducing gun violence in Oregon will take effort, and the reality is that this bill takes common sense steps to make our communities safer, respect responsible gun owners, and help law enforcement do their jobs. It's the action we need to save lives. I would like to add that we are also looking at funding community violence interventions, upstream measures to help prevent people from resorting to violence in the first place. This is work that's already being supported with state investment, and we would like to extend the funding of rooting out the risk factors for violence. I've heard happily many people on the floor today say that we must better fund behavioral health and other programs. Of course, I agree. But let's remember that those diagnosed with mental illness are more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. And we must do all we can to separate a person in crisis from the lethal means of a gun, and then let's get that person in crisis the help and support they need. I would like to follow up on a few more concerns raised in this chamber today. Regarding constitutionality, the boundaries of the Second Amendment are far from settled right now, as the Supreme Court in the United States decision on Bruin came out about a year ago. But in the meantime, lawmakers have a duty to their constituents to pass life-saving measures. Furthermore, this bill clarifies on how this all should be exercised and which states have the constitutional ability to do. 18 to 20-year-olds will still be able to possess firearms that are common for hunting and target shooting. And if they choose to join the military and acquire the skills and responsibilities of using weapons of war, then the prohibition of possessing other firearms no longer applies to them. I heard a few times 98% of mass shootings are in gun-free zones. I will reference an Associated Press article that finds issue with this oft-cited figure. It comes from a study by a gun rights advocacy group, and it is flawed. It excludes gang-related incidents. It includes military bases and other locations that are not gun-free. There's no definitive data on how many mass shootings occur in gun-free zones because there's no consensus on how to define that. And as tragic as mass shootings are, and they are, we talk about them a lot here, they constitute about 1% of all gun deaths in this country. And furthermore, 46% of mass shootings are perpetrated by an intimate partner. I don't think those happen in gun-free zones. Firearm dealers are already prohibited from selling to someone under 21 a handgun, and that firearm is most often used for self-protection. So under this bill, individuals between 18 and 20 will still be able to purchase firearms that are commonly used for hunting, and they can use those firearms for self-protection if they do choose. Look, in the end, I refuse to be on the complacent side of this issue when we or my children or grandchildren look back and say in disbelief, can you believe that schools were routinely shot up in the early 21st century? How can it be that in our lifetime, children were killed at their desks in cold blood, sometimes while armed guards waited in the hallway? and that their mangled bodies were identified by the sneakers they wore to school on the very last day of their lives. While I know that there is much work to do, I also know that this bill will help us get on the path to a better, stronger future where we won't have to live in fear. Do not look away. Please vote aye on House Bill 2005.
Thank you, Representative. Those of you who opinion that the bill should pass will vote aye. Those opposed, no. The clerk will open the voting system. Representative Nelson, how do you vote? Nelson votes aye. Representative Boyce, how do you vote? Boyce votes no. Representative Boshart Davis, how do you vote? Boshart Davis votes no. Representative Breese-Iverson, how do you vote? Breese-Iverson votes no. Representative Kate, how do you vote? Kate votes no. Representative Conrad, how do you vote? Conrad votes no. Representative Kramer, how do you vote? Kramer votes no. Representative Diehl, how do you vote? Diehl votes no. Representative Elmer, how do you vote? Representative Elmer votes no. Representative Goodwin, how do you vote? Goodwin votes no. Representative Helfrich, how do you vote? Helfrich votes no. Representative Bobby Levy, how do you vote? Representative Bobby Levy votes no. Representative Lewis, how do you vote? Representative Lewis votes no. Representative McIntire, how do you vote? Representative McIntire votes no. Representative Morgan, how do you vote? Representative Morgan votes no. Representative Osborne, how do you vote? Representative Osborne votes no. Representative Owens, how do you vote? Representative Owens votes no. Representative Reschke, how do you vote? Representative Reschke votes no. Representative Scharf, how do you vote? Representative Scharf votes no. Representative Stout, how do you vote? Representative Stout votes no. Representative Wright, how do you vote? Representative Wright votes no. Again, colleagues, after a long 2 days of debate, I really want to thank everybody for the robust debate that we had on the floor and the respect that everyone showed each other. It is not often where you see a debate where the majority party yielded 3 times to make sure that all voices were heard. And so I want to thank everyone for encouraging that dynamic today. I also want to make sure that it's known that no matter what your vote was today, I believe and know that everyone in this building and in this chamber wants to make our community safer. House Bill 2005B, having received the required constitutional majority, is declared passed. Messages from the Senate. You do. All right. Propositions and motions. First reading of House bills.
House Bill 3620 relating to urbanization, declaring an emergency. House Bill 3621 relating to certificates of need.
Bills read first time pass the Speaker's desk for referral. Oh, excuse me. Representative Reschke is in the privilege queue. For what reason are you in the privilege queue, Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to declare a point of order.
And please state your point of order.
My point of order is I have concerns that House Bill 3620 and House Bill 3621 fail to score at least 60 on the flesh readability test and therefore violate ORS 171.134 and House Rule 14.15.
And we'll stand at ease for one quick moment. Representative Reschke, we'll go ahead and acknowledge the timeliness of your point of order, but we will address these issues should they become necessary later on in the session.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We're still under first reading of House bills. Bills read first time are passed to Speaker's desk for referral. Second reading of House bills. Consent calendar. Third reading of House bills. Chair requesting unanimous consent that the rules be suspended and the bills on today's remaining third reading House bills be carried over to their proper place on the May 3rd, 2023 calendar. Is there any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Final readings, memorials, and resolutions. Bills, reports, and other business lying on the table. First reading of Senate bills. Second reading of Senate bills. Third reading of Senate bills. Chair requesting unanimous consent that the rules be suspended and that the bills and measures today remaining on the third reading of Senate bills be carried over to their proper place on the May 3rd, 2023 calendar. Is there any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Other business of the House. Orders of the day have been completed. Announcements. Representative Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this afternoon, law enforcement officers, retired officers and family members, and others gathered at the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training facility in Salem to pay their respects and honor the fallen Oregon law enforcement officers in advance of May 15th, the federally proclaimed National Peace Officers Memorial Day. This year, 193 fallen officers whose names are inscribed on the memorial wall at DPSST were honored, including the name of one additional fallen officer, Beaverton Police Sergeant Brian Gaunt, who died in the line of duty in 2021. Of note, NISA Reserve Corporal Joseph Johnson, who died in the line of duty just a few weeks ago, will be added to the wall next year. Colleagues, I encourage you to pause today and remember Oregon's fallen police officers who made the ultimate sacrifice in protection of our communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further announcements. Remonstrances. Representative McIntire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, are we or are we not a nation of laws? Are we under the rule of law, or are we under the rule of law only if it benefits the majority? The rule of law applies to all people at all times in an equal manner and in a given jurisdiction. We have the privilege and the responsibility to pass measures in this House, which, if the Senate passes and the governor signs, becomes a law of this state and codified as Oregon revised statutes. So I wonder, do we expect Oregonians to comply, to obey the laws that we pass? Of course we do. Should the laws we pass apply to all Oregonians at all time in an equal manner? Of course they should. Yet today, we set the example of just the opposite. Do what we say, not what we do. That is a message sent by ignoring the mandatory requirements of ORS 171.134. Perhaps a little history is in order. Senate Bill 543, introduced in the legislative session of 1979, was passed and signed into law by the governor and was codified as ORS 171.134. It requires both the House and Senate to prepare measure summaries that meet a certain standard of readability. In brief, the history of ORS 171.134 shows the sponsors of Senate Bill 543 intended that information supplied for public information should be understandable to the public, and the bill would require a grade level reading of 8th grade. Further, the proponents wanted the Oregon legislature to make sure that the American people are able to understand these bills. The flesh test was specifically adopted by the Oregon legislature because obtaining a score of 60 would mean that the readability of a measure summary had at least an 8th grade reading level. The summary for House Bill 2002B does not comply with the shall contained in ORS 171.134. The present score is 14.33. A college graduate level is required to understand, not a score of 60 or more. A clear violation of the law, and then there are House rules. Are we going to ignore our own rules? The requirement of House Rule 1415 and ORS 171.134 are clear. If a measure summary does not comply with the House Rule 14.15 or ORS 171.134, specifically including falling below 60 on the flesh reading ease test, then it cannot be accepted by the Chief Clerk of the House for introduction. While there is no provision in the Oregon Constitution for readability tests for information published by the legislature, Article 4, Section 21 provides, every act and joint resolution shall be plainly worded, avoiding as far as practicable the use of technical terms. Do we not in this chamber still hold that the Oregon Constitution guides, restricts, and encourages the democratic republic we call Oregon? We should, yet today we cast aside the requirements of a valid statute which conforms with the mandates of the Oregon Constitution. And for what? For the sake of expedience, because we could. Today we are confusing capacity with authority. Why? Because we have the ability, the power to ignore the law.
Excuse me, Representative, I apologize, your time is up. Thank you. Further remonstrances, Representative Scharf.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, this body voted against a constitutional right with over 200 years of historic significance, a right that has been central to the American way of life since its conception. I'm saddened by this decision, and I worry for the Oregonians this measure will harm. The right to bear arms is more than just a right for hunting. It's more than just a hobby. It is a constitutional guarantee for the ability to defend oneself and one's family. As a body, we have a duty to make this state a safe place to live, and we endeavor to do so in a variety of ways, from law enforcement on the front line to addressing the root causes of violence. But we can't do everything. We can't protect everyone in every circumstance. This is why I feel so strongly about firearms ownership. It's an assurance that our physical safety doesn't depend on others, that we are in control of our own safety, our own protection. Though we failed to stop this measure today, the fight, it's not over. A bad decision here today does not commit us to upholding it in years to come. I know my rights. My constituents know their rights. And House Bill 2005B goes against the violation of these rights, cannot be allowed to stand. While I fear for the repercussions this measure will create, I look forward to the opportunity to correct this monumentous mistake and restore this fundamental right to all Oregonians. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further remonstrances, Representative Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm disappointed. Not surprising. The final vote. However, as so eloquently stated by one of my colleagues, there's a lot left to do. And we're not going to get there unless we work together. I think that's why we're here. So we work together to benefit all Oregonians. And I look forward to that challenge. And I look forward to continue to work with each of you. I'm still puzzled why we go after law-abiding citizens to utilize their Second Amendment rights, and as eloquently stated by my colleague, do no wrong. I'm reminded of my 5th grade teacher. He was standing at the board, and somebody shot a spitwad, hit her right in the back of the head. And for those of you who don't know what a spitwad is, I think most of us do. It's a wadded up piece of paper that you shoot through a straw, usually a rubber band if you're really good at it. She turned around and was very upset. And instead of trying to find out who did the deed, and she did ask the class, nobody would own up to it. So she punished the whole class. We all had to stay in at lunch recess with our heads down on our desks for a half an hour. It was torture. That wasn't fair then, Mr. Speaker. And this is not fair to our 18 to 20 years old. When this bill, as I believe, does not stem gun violence as it's supposed to do, what's next? I heard that this is a first step. What is step 2? Is this bill the grease on the slippery slope to eventually do away with all gun rights as we are doing away with the vehicles that use fossil fuel? I realize that's a reach on the former, but it's reality on the latter as of recently. Colleagues, we just passed a bill to restrict 18 to 20-year-olds from the right to possession of certain firearms. And there are laws, and we know them now. We've gone over them and over them all day.
I do apologize, Representative, but your time is up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm done.
I don't want to launch any spitwads at you. Further remonstrances, Representative Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 2 days, we've had conversations about bills that there were very, very different perspectives about. And what 3, 4, 5 terms has taught me is that even though they get heated here, I would much rather have legislation argued about with robust, well-meaning people that may or may not be settled someday by the courts than the alternatives, where things are settled with firearms outside and they forget about the whole idea of a ballot and they go for the bullet. It's going to be hard in this legislative session. There's going to be probably 2 or 3 more of the kinds of bills that can make us question why we're here, what we believe in. And on this bill, on this day, we may find ourselves here. On another day, another bill, we may find ourselves surprisingly in a different situation than we thought we might. I'm asking for the following. Over the last several days, there have been some ideas, some comments made that I don't think necessarily help build us up. I don't think being called tyrants or dominators or resume patters or illiterate or racist or misogynist and everything but term is helpful to anybody. I think everybody is here to try to do the best they know. I think everybody here actually, whether they want to admit it or not in front of the public or the press, recognize that it's a hard job on a good day and we have far more common with each other than we want to admit. I'm asking this, to let us continue to agree to fight as hard as we can, to make our cases as hard as we can, to test the evidence as hard as we can, but to try to make it personal. Because we have some really big things ahead of us. Some of the things that aren't partisan, they're not ideological. They don't have to be divisive, but they're going to be hard because the outside public doesn't necessarily understand that it's hard to govern in an era where we want a Cadillac, but we will pay for a Geo. We're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to work together. I absolutely respect everybody that was making their case on each side of the debates over the last couple of days. I look forward to even more colorful, robust debates moving forward. But I do ask that we take a moment and for ourselves at least, commit to ourselves that we're going to try to follow what Representative from most of Eastern Oregon suggested today in terms of seeking first to understand where people are coming from and trying to work in common cause. I think we have the potential to make big changes.
I do apologize, Representative. Your time is up.
And I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further remonstrances. Adjournment. Greg Smith, 11 a.m.
Mr. Speaker, I move we adjourn until 11 a.m. tomorrow, Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023.
Representative Greg Smith moves the House adjourn until 11 a.m. Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023, without objection.